and welcome to this November 3rd Committee, Law and Licensing Committee meeting. We will go ahead and begin. We have all 5 members here present with us, and we will go ahead and begin with agenda item 2.1. This is public comment. We have first with us Kiara Guyman, who is online. We're going to give our public 2 minutes to comment, and please keep it professional and courteous. Thank you. Kiara, go ahead.
Hi, I'm here to talk about the reason to change siblings being able to go to the deaf school with their deaf siblings. So I want to share some reasons why this is beneficial to children, to the deaf children and their families. When siblings attend the same school, it fosters stronger family bonds and enhances family dynamics. They share a common experience, and parents can engage more easily in their children's education. By making this an option, parents and hearing students take responsibility for potential impact on their learning. They understand the challenges and opportunities involved and can prepare accordingly, mitigating any concerns about slowing down the educational process. Allowing hearing siblings to attend deaf schools promotes an inclusive environment where they can learn about deaf culture and the challenges their siblings face. This promotes empathy, understanding, and a sense of belonging. This approach recognizes that different families have different priorities. It respects the principle of educational choice, where parents can decide what's best for their children. This also enables siblings to communicate effectively and helps bridge communication gaps between them. Deaf children often face unique challenges, and by having emotional support and a sense of security. This support can also be particularly crucial during moments of frustration, anxiety, or isolation that some deaf children may experience. My personal experience, our hearing daughter and our deaf daughter both attended USCB pre-K together. It improved their ability to communicate with each other, but we were told after pre-K, our hearing daughter would need to go to mainstream schooling. The communication between the girls started to fall behind. Our home is a sign and spoken home where both parents are learning ASL. Our deaf daughter does not have any auditory nerves and malformed cochlea, so her only form of communication is ASL. We understand the importance of ASL in her life and ours moving forward. The time our hearing daughter had at the deaf school was such a benefit for our deaf daughter. In conclusion, offering hearing students the choice to attend a deaf school with their siblings or with limited ASL skills respects the autonomy of families, allows for flexible learning paths, and empowers students and parents to take responsibilities for their educational decisions. Thank you for your time in reviewing this change.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Lexi Cunningham. Any one of the 3. Yeah, you got options today. And then just hit the speaking button. Yep.
Good morning, Chair Hymas. Thank you for this opportunity. Members of the board that are here, good morning to you. Later this morning, you are going to be talking about a topic that is data sharing for charter school marketing and potential amendments. Great conversation. I think that this, and I have talked to the charter schools, this is a bigger conversation than this charter schools. This really is about all LEAs and data sharing, not just charter schools being able to get information from local districts. It's also about local districts that can get information from charter schools and sharing that information. We are open to that conversation, but just want to make sure that it is about all LEAs having that optional information. There were several options presented. Our preference would be none of these options, but to start first with a conversation between charter schools and maybe superintendents and see if we can solve it that way without having to make an amendment to the rule, and just see if just good communication can and getting the right people in the room can solve this. This one of the options, if you do feel that communication is not the option that you want to go with, we are very opposed to option 4, using a third-party resource to house data. That is very concerning. Wish I'd had that when I was coming up. I could have made a grand entrance. No, that's okay. So we're open to this conversation. We want to be a part of the solution, not part of the problem. But I really feel that maybe a rule change is not necessary at this time, that it really is just getting the right people in the room and talking this through and making sure everybody understands that what data can be shared, what data can't be shared. And then if you do make a rule change, please leave it up to the LEAs to decide if they want it to be an opt-in for parents or an opt-out. But I do feel that we all get along, and with the charters and the LEAs, I think we can solve this problem without a rule change that could potentially provide more work for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Lexi. Next, we will hear from Royce Van Tassel.
Morning, Royce Van Tassel, Utah Association of Public Charter Schools. Always good to be here. And I think it's important to note that Lexi and I have talked about the data sharing issue for some time. She's absolutely right. This is not something that is specific to charter schools. The data ought to really be shared regardless. We're talking about public schools and making sure that parents are aware of the options that are out there. And it doesn't matter whether it's people wanting to say, hey, we want to know about the cool options that are existing in districts or the cool options that exist in charter schools. We ought to make sure that that's possible. Lexi noted that one way that's not on the option list to address this would be to simply say, let's have those conversations and those requests happen informally. As you'll hear from some of our charter directors today, those conversations have happened for some time over the years, that the data used to be shared for reasons that are opaque. That stopped. And frankly, that's why we came and said, hey, is there a way that we can make this easier? I think that there are a lot of different possibilities about how this is accomplished, but parents do need to be aware of the options that are available to them. And so we're hoping that we can make this work, whether it happens through rule or more informal processes, as Lexi talked about. I'm frankly a little bit ambivalent about. I am somewhat skeptical, just given the experience that at least our early college high schools have faced with half dozen or so school districts that they've worked with over the last couple of years. For whatever reasons, those attitudes changed. If they go back to their historic norms, then life is a lot easier. But I think that it is important for us to be able to let parents know what those options are. And it really, again, doesn't matter which direction that goes. The data ought to be available to everybody. So thank you.
Thank you, Royce. Next up, we have Wendy Hart joining us via Zoom.
Hi, thank
Wendy,
you.
go ahead.
Yep. Thank you, Chair Hymas and board members. Just a little bit of background about me. I did help participate in starting Lincoln Academy Charter School, and I spent 8 years as a Board of Education member of the Alpine School District. So I kind of have feet in both worlds. I'm also a database analyst and a member of the Student Data Privacy Committee. So my comments today are about data privacy. I have grave concerns about this being an opt-out as opposed to an opt-in. I think parents need to opt in. One of the concerns that parents have is that if you opt out, then there are problems with the yearbooks and things like that. That's been historically an issue. So I think parents are concerned that if they do an opt-in or an opt-out, that we need to make it very specific that you're opting in to get marketing materials for other educational options. And I think that would be fine handled on a local level if that were clear. The other option that I would suggest is to create a portal on the USBE website that allows a parent to go in and say, this is the address that I'm looking at, and give me all of my options here. And then you can drill down, go to the websites of the different organizations that are available. And that could be available, homeschooling co-ops and private schools could even end up on there if that's what they wanted to do. But once you give, I especially opposed to option 4, but once you give information out, it's out there. And so I would just say, I think these all need to be opt-in options for parents. And we just need to let them know that it's very specific for these other schools that might give them options for their kids. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Next, we have Cindy Phillips.
Chair Hymas and members of the committee, thank you so much for letting me speak. I'm Cindy Phillips. I'm representing the State Charter School Board in these comments, including Brian Bowles, who is the chair and was unable to be here today. First of all, I wanted to mention that I believe that this conversation mischaracterizes as marketing or advertising what's actually happening here. That term implies an incentive that's probably monetary or some other for-profit enterprise. In fact, this is an attempt to make sure that we have good educational information for our students and families in Utah. When we talk about distributing information for the Carson Smith Scholarship, we're looking at equity and accessibility. When we're looking at an actual requirement for the manager of the Utah Fits All Scholarship as an expectation to make sure that this information is widely distributed to all students in Utah and families, we don't talk about marketing. When the SCSB authorizes or other authorizers authorize a charter school, we require them to present a plan for how they will distributing information about this new choice in education. I think that Itinerus Early College and JTech in Jordan should be able to share information so that all of the students attending those schools know what the options are educationally in their neighborhood or in their district or in a nearby district. Besides a proper characterization, the committee should not should consider not characterizing this as marketing or advertising, because advertising per se is actually limited and forbidden by the Utah Student Data Privacy Law. So we need to be careful about the terminology we're using here. I also think this is an equity issue. Charters have received criticism in the past because they sometimes do not reflect the demographics of their resident districts. But they can only do so much within regular outreach without the data that they need. Planting a flyer on a door in an apartment building where you hope that diverse students might actually know about your charter school, for instance, and consider enrolling is not the same as being able to send a specific letter to a family informing them of this choice that they might have nearby. In addition, the SCSB in general supports the sharing between districts and charters, as well as charter to charter, freely without a fiscal note, or perhaps a request to the USBE, which would require some recoding maybe of UTREX or in other ways. We don't believe that there is any real choice without proper information. Our state has demonstrated how highly it values choice and families' ability to make those choices. And again, there is no real choice without the information. We have shown that by our open enrollment for districts. We've shown that by the fact that charter schools have no boundaries and are open to anyone statewide. And we've shown that with our Utah Fits All Scholarship. We are opposed to both option 3, which we think is burdensome on LEAs, and on option 4, which we think is bad policy. And we don't think it should be an opt-in, because who wants to opt in? I'm never going to check a box that opts in for me to receive more marketing in my email or any other way. Instead, we should consider that parents already have the option to opt out of distributing their directory information, and LEAs could use that already in their systems to present the reports that they need to when there's a request from another LEA charter or otherwise to receive that directory information. Thank you so much for your consideration. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Cindy. Next, we have Renee Edwards.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Renee Edwards. I'm the director of Itinerus Early College High School. This is my 8th year as director, and I began at the school 16 years ago. So I was around Itinerus when we were actually started by Jordan School District and chartered by the district. At that time, we were invited to go into their high schools and present what our program was about and what our school was about. And we had a great relationship. Along the way, we parted from the district and we went under the state charter school board as our authorizer. And we were no longer allowed to go in and do presentations. We had to recruit in different ways. Excuse me. I'll say about 6 years ago, sorry, just need to get my notes. About 6 years ago, we received a grammar request from Jordan School District asking for our students' names and addresses. I called the chief privacy officer, Whitney Phillips, at the time and said, do I need to abide by this request? And she said, absolutely. And I said, is there any reason why I can't request the same of them? And she said, no. So I submitted a grammar request and they sent me, minus the families that had opted out of directory, they'd sent me the list of students so that I could send information about our school. This went on for the next 5 years. All was fine. We also pulled some students from Granite District along the corridor of Bangerter Highway because we're in West Jordan. And so I had done a grammar request to Granite District and they said, no, we're not going to honor this request. We did that several years and got the same response. Last year, when I submitted the grammar request to Jordan, they said, we're not going to honor the request because it's for marketing reasons. So I'm not sure what changed. I can say that I've met with Dr. Godfrey a few times about the notion that we, Superintendent of Jordan School District, about the notion that we both reside in a community. We want to do what's best for our students. I feel like we're on the same page with that. Jordan School District does not offer an early college high school, although I applaud them for the programs that they put in place. They've really become flexible to families and put things in place like their online high school. And I don't think that we're a direct competition, our 400 student population. I'll also say, I do feel like this is an equity issue. We, since our school began, have tried to recruit students that maybe traditionally their family didn't go to college, so a first generation college goer. We opened this school year with 57% diversity, which is higher than the district that we reside in. We also have about 20% of our students considered English language learners, yet over 95% of them are graduating with access to college. So I feel like us being able to get information out to families that maybe aren't savvy to how systems work, that can get information in their language. We do send a letter out both in Spanish and English that will provide them opportunities that they may not know are aware. So I do think that I would love to be able to, like Ms. Cunningham said, work with the district. I have tried, and I'm kind of hitting a wall. So as for the 4 options, I agree that I'm not sure any of them are ideal. We are already collecting opt-out information for directory at every school, and we're already collecting addresses that are loaded up to Utrecht. So it would be great if we can somehow not have to work directly with the district, but maybe go to a state, go to this state to work getting lists with families that are maybe nearby in our neighborhood. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Renee. And that concludes our public comment portion of the agenda, I believe. Okay, thank you. We will move now to agenda item 2.2, R277-925, Effective Teachers in High Poverty Schools Incentive Program. This is an amendment, and Angie Stallings is going to cue us up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. Just a brief background on the action that's been taken on this rule previously. This rule came to the Law and Licensing Committee in August and then went to the full board in September. You may remember that during the full board discussion, there were some amendments related to how you calculate a full year, and then some discussion of potentially changing the words, for example, performance to achievement, as well as looking maybe at how growth is calculated. So the rule was then referred back to committee. So that's why we're here today. Staff got together to discuss the motions and the discussion that happened at the board and tried to brainstorm information that might be helpful to board members as we look at the rule. And I'll show the rule language in just a moment, but there are two pieces of new information that are in backup that were not there when it first came to the committee. So I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention. So first, the 2023 annual report on this program is now in backup on Civic Clerk, as well as staff recommendation that everyone take a look at this video on how USBE calculates student growth percentiles. It's about a 5-minute video, and with the chair's permission, we're going to watch it together as a group. And before we do that, I did just want to show everyone the language again. There's only 2 changes to this rule. They were both, well, one was made because it was required due to a bill that passed during the 2023 session, a defined term that had previously been in 53E4307 was moved into the section of code related to this program. So that is why we made the changes on 19 and 20. And then as a reminder, the change to the language on 56 and 57, which is where the conversation the board had was focused, was on these 2 lines. Really that for the teachers, students who are taught by the teacher for a full academic year is a codification of the practice. That's been the practice of the staff since the inception of the program. And in order to make that clear, because before it just said as measured by student performance on a standards assessment, oftentimes people were asking the questions that board members were, well, what about if a student's only, there for half the year or a quarter of the year? And the answer to that is no, they are not included and they have never been included. And that is why staff recommended adding this clarification that it's for students who are taught by the teacher for a full academic year. And just one other fact that I'll just remind the committee of that came out during the board meeting is that a full academic year is already through business rules under our data and stats team. That is 160 days out of 180 days. So that is what a full academic year currently is. And that's used not just for this program, but various programs. So I believe Aaron Bruff is with us virtually in the Zoom room. Is that correct, Vanessa? And he is the best person and expert to be able to walk us through any questions you have or provide us with additional information. And so I just now need to pull up this YouTube link, and I am hopeful that whatever I do on here is going to work audio. I should have tested this before, so I apologize in advance. Just one moment. I'm trying to, this document unfortunately doesn't allow me to select to
No
get
worries.
the link. So anything you want to say while we
I don't know if the committee has seen this YouTube video on student growth percentiles. It's very helpful for understanding. So we thought it would be worth showing here. And then we can jump into additional questions regarding the amendments and the rule.
Can I ask a question?
Please, Member Lear.
Very simple. So I can't, I'm kind of speechless for a moment, but I'm kind of startled always when I cannot even, I have a blank about remembering what happened a month or 2 months ago, but I do vaguely remember the discussion. However, the language that we have on 57 is what we came up with in the committee or in the board, or that's what was initially proposed and you haven't changed it at all?
The language that's right there was staff recommended, and it is what passed, that the committee passed and approved. So
Right.
there's only one draft that so far we did not make any amendments to the rule based on the discussion. We, what we were directed to do was to provide additional information, because I think that what was happening during the board meeting is we were having some discovery of how do you calculate growth percentiles? What would the impact be if you change performance to achievement? The short story on that one is if you change from performance to achievement, you take out growth, which the whole purpose of this program is about calculating a teacher's median growth percentile to be able to give stipends to teachers who are producing more growth than normal. And so you really can't take the growth out if you want to accomplish the program. Yeah.
Make sure.
Yeah.
There were any changes.
Yep, no changes. All right, should we go ahead and show it? It looks like the audio is going to be coming from my computer, so I am going to use this microphone. Okay, here we go.
Student growth percentiles are one of the main metrics used to determine school effectiveness. The Department of Assessment and Accountability within Utah State Office of Education has made this video to guide stakeholders into better understanding this important metric. Let's look at an example. Last year, Anthony was a third grader who took the statewide math test and had a scale score of 290. Looking at the cut scores for third grade math, a score of 290 is considered to be level 1 or below proficient. In a closer look, we see that Anthony's score of 290 is at the lower end of the scores. Had Anthony scored between 297 and 316, he would have been considered a level 2 or approaching proficient. A student who receives a proficiency level of a 3 or 4 is considered to be proficient. In addition to knowing whether or not a student was proficient, a student's growth in ability from year to year is also helpful information for instruction. In the following year, Anthony completed his fourth grade math test and scored a 340. According to the cut scores for the fourth grade test, Anthony is considered a level 2 or approaching proficient. Utah's math assessments are vertically scaled. However, we are not able to simply subtract the current score of 340 from the previous score of 290 to measure growth, because the difference of 50 points doesn't tell us if Anthony's growth was below average, average, or higher than average. So how do we know how much Anthony grew last year? Last year, all Utah third graders took the same math test as Anthony. If you recall, Anthony scored a 290 on the test. We then take other third grade students around the state who scored similarly to Anthony and create a comparison group. Comparison groups are determined solely on their assessment scores. Other demographics of students are not taken into account, such as English language proficiency, special education status, ethnicity, or free or reduced lunch status. What we want to know is, relative to his comparison group, how much did Anthony's math ability grow in the past year? Here you can see that overall, Anthony's comparison group performed lower than the state average. The highest performing students in Anthony's comparison group barely made proficiency. Recall that Anthony scored a 340 on his fourth grade math assessment. Analyzing the data more closely, we see that Anthony performed better than 80% of his comparison group. This 80% translates to a student growth percentile of 80. In Utah's state accountability system, an SGP of 40 or higher is considered to have made sufficient growth. In Anthony's case, his SGP of 80 is considered high growth. Now let's look at a few other students in Anthony's class. Here you see that students in Anthony's classroom received different scores on the math assessment in third and fourth grade. Each student has their own comparison group based on previous assessment scores. And depending on a student's performance relative to their statewide comparison group performance, each student receives an SGP between 1 and 99. Note that high proficiency does not necessarily mean high growth, and vice versa. For example, this student's scores gave him a proficiency of 4 both years, but his SGP is only 2, which tells us that he performed better than 2% of his comparison group, even though he was highly proficient in both years. Students with the same score can have different SGPs. For example, both Anthony and his classmate received a 340 on the fourth grade math assessment, but because they were in different comparison groups based on past performance, their SGPs are different. Also note that students with the same SGP can have very different scores. SGPs not only show how individual students are progressing, but they also can be aggregated to show how schools and districts are performing. How can we determine a school or classroom's performance based on individual students' SGP? We can use the median growth percentile, or MGP, for estimating the growth of students within a school or a classroom. Anthony is one of 19 students who attends Mr. Lyman's fourth grade classroom. In order to calculate an MGP, we first rank each student in order of their individual SGP. Median means middle, so we take the middle SGP, and that becomes the classroom MGP. In this case, the MGP for Mr. Lyman's classroom is 55. For more information regarding SGPs and MGPs and how they are used in Utah's accountability systems, please review Utah's Accountability Technical Manual found here, or contact the Department of Assessment and Accountability. Student growth percentiles are
There we go. I don't know if you want to turn it to Aaron.
Aaron, do you have comments for us?
Not at the moment, so thank you.
Okay, okay.
Other than sorry for not being there in person, but I do have COVID, so that's why I am remote today, so.
No worries. We appreciate you being here and looking sharp, still wearing a tie in your COVID time. I mean, goodness. Okay, so committee members, do we have any questions regarding these amendments and this rule? Member Wood?
Can we go back to the language? I do have a question in terms of what happens to a teacher or to a student who may have been in the school for the full year, or in the classroom for the full year, but did not come from Utah the year before. So there is no growth score. Is that included in that language that will be pulled out also?
Aaron, can you?
Absolutely.
Please, yes.
Thank you. So if a student does not have 2 years of history, we cannot calculate this growth score, this MG or the SGP on the student. So the answer is they are not included in the calculation. So if you have 50 kids and one student is new, there is no growth score. And so they're not included in the calculation at all.
And does this language reflect that? Or is that just a known? We just know
If I
that.
If I may, the
Please.
language, yeah, again, the language itself does not reflect the reality of the calculations or what goes on behind the scenes. So, I mean, obviously, if you wanted to add that language in there saying only students who have an SGP can be used in the calculation or something, or only students who we can calculate growth with. But it's not reflected in this language. It's just for the stats department and people who work with it. It's a known quantity, meaning we can't calculate that growth.
Thank you, Aaron.
Perfect. Thank you.
Angie has a follow-up with that as well.
One thing I just wanted to add is if we wanted to codify that, because maybe, it is a business rule right now that's being used by data and stats. I don't know that this is the right place to codify it, because I would think we would want to put it in our data standards rule, because it's something that's used for many programs, not just this. But that would just be my recommendation, because it makes it seem like it's a specific thing just for this program, when really it's just the standard practice for calculations in general.
Member Lear?
But
I know I jumped the gun. I'm sorry.
I am just thinking who to ask this question. Maybe Aaron. I was reminded because Leanne showed me the motions that we couldn't, that we fussed over as a board and couldn't decide on. And it reminded me of the discussion that, and that I can also kind of saw initially when I looked again at this language, full academic year is a tough one. I agree that a teacher shouldn't be responsible, or not a teacher be responsible, but the calculation is maybe not as helpful if the student has been there half the time or less than half the time. And with increasingly mobile students and families, that's pretty common, as I understand it, in certain, especially in some schools. But I'm wondering if either of you, if Aaron has an opinion, Angie has an opinion, I don't know who else would be, about if you could calculate if the student has been there 80% of the time. Because I hate to both disadvantage the calculation if a student's really been there long enough to where he should be included. So I don't know. Aaron, do you have an opinion, or Ange, do you have an opinion?
I have an opinion, but I'll give you some some empirical
That's
evidence
great
behind
too.
it. So,
Right.
so there are two basic rules of inclusion that we utilize when we're doing aggregating of the students for this calculation. So rule number one, you have to have enough that it makes sense. So there's a bottom threshold of 10, meaning you've got to have at least 10 kids. Anything below that, what happens is one is there's a high possibility that you will be disclosing student performance and becomes a violation of FERPA. So we have that disclosure avoidance component inside of there. Also in our accountability model, that is a requirement. We need to have 10. It really has to do with when you're below that threshold, it's kind of like a flipping of a quarter. You're not really saying a teacher's doing well or not. It's the number of students can vacillate, or the scores can change so much. You're not really getting a good statistical indicator of performance for that teacher or the students underneath that teacher. So just bringing in that one is there's a threshold of 10. The second one is when you use the full academic year, the practice is useful academic year because, again, through accountability practices, teachers want to be held accountable for the kids that they've had for the majority of the year, not for students that they had for less. Now, can that threshold be changed? Of course, it can be changed. But what you're introducing then is more randomness into, or potential for randomness into the calculation. We could include it. We could just say any student that the teacher worked with that year could be included, but you're not really trying to capture at that moment the impact of the teacher. And again, the point of this calculation of this program is if a teacher has a student for the majority of the year, and we can see that the students have high growth, there is then the assumption or the attribution of the teacher's teaching ability and skills is what has helped driving those students forward. If you remove that, then what you're saying is, I'm trying to be more, if you will, gambling's not the right word, but it's, it's by chance. Hey, I've got enough kids inside of here, I can get it or not. So that's why that standard is put in place, is saying, and again, it's a standard. If I've had the kid for the majority of the year, then when we look at their student growth aggregated into the MGP, it should give us a fairly good indicator that yes, that teacher is having a marked impact on those students, and they should qualify then for that additional
Matt, can I
fund.
follow? Can I follow up? Because you're not quite getting to my question, Aaron, and I don't know if it's because you're too much of a data and statistics guy, but
Maybe.
it doesn't say majority of the year. It says full academic year, which to me says enrolled for that full year. And that
160
seems,
days.
that seems like a too high of a bar. And I'm saying, would it be too technically difficult, or does it complicate it too much to say 80%, or is there something statistically that is reasonable?
Can I ask, just to add on to my understanding of the data rules that exist in the data rules section is a full year is 100 out of 160 out of 180. So
That does give you.
that gives you the roughly whatever.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. That is, so if the full academic year really means a little less than the full academic year sometimes,
Yeah.
then I think it captures what I'm concerned about.
And what I wanted to kind of piggyback on the same idea is, in another state, if you had a withdrawal in your attendance record, like in Utrecht's, you also were excluded. Even if you hit 160 days. Does a withdrawal, so a student withdrew and then came back to the school, is that part of our data rules, or is it strictly 160 days, period? Does that make sense?
Yes, if I can answer. So question, there's a couple questions in there. So let's go with the secondary one and I'll let Darren also respond to that. If the student withdraws and then comes back, but the total enrollment does equal 160 or more within the school, then it is full academic. So we have rules
Thank
for
you.
100, full academic for the school, for the district, and for the state. We actually calculate it 3 different times depending on their movement. So that is available. I'd love to hear what Darren has to say first.
Darren, please.
Are you okay
Thank you,
with
Chair.
160?
As I listen to this discussion and I try to go back to what we talked about last time this role was in committee, it feels like there's a little confusion about what this language is trying to do. We're focusing, it feels like, on the full academic year student growth percentile at the student level, but as we see here on line 57 and really 53, we're trying to determine, this language is trying to determine the eligible teacher. We're talking about, this discussion is starting to focus on eligible student for a student growth percentile. If I recall the legislation, Angie, correctly, this was the legislation's attempt to try to bring clarity to, if I'm a teacher and I teach less than a full year, let's say there's a change in employment and I come in January and teach the rest of the year, am I eligible to receive, assuming that my class has an MGP of 70, I've taught at least one state assessed subject, am I eligible for the compensation, or is the teacher who came before me eligible for the compensation, assuming that these other eligibility requirements are true?
Thank you, Darren, for getting us back on track here. And Angie has some follow-up. She actually interrupted at the same time as your hand came up. She said, Chair, we're getting in a different area here. So Angie.
Yes, and so the point of, and just to put kind of a second witness to what Darren said, the focus of this rule is really just about which teachers are eligible. If the board really wanted to get into the space of discussing the general accountability and calculation rules, it would be better in a different rule, like, I don't know if it's 404, it's one of the 400s. Also, a lot of how we calculate growth and achievement for purposes of general accountability is handled or addressed in Utah code as well. So I agree with Darren. Here we need to focus on which teachers are eligible for the stipend.
Any other discussion or a motion? Member Wood.
Well, looking at trying to respect some of the work from the board meeting, but knowing that this is a really simple thing that we're talking about, I would like to move that the board approve our 277295 with the following amendment. Basically, it's keeping the same language except for putting in the language that was requested in the board meeting, restricted to those students who were taught by the teacher a full academic year. It just clarifies it a little bit.
Angie's going to type that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's make sure you get your amendment up here. We'll put it on the floor here, then we'll speak to it and have conversation.
You're finished. Can you make it a little bigger, Angela? That's how it's going to be. Thank you.
And you can tell me if that changes anything. That's just looking at multiple motions that were made before. That one seemed to be the only one that actually makes sense to what we really want out of this rule. So as measured by student performance on a standards assessment restricted to those students who were taught by the teacher for a full academic year.
So would it,
Mhm.
if you don't mind, would it be, and I will in just a sec, I just need to see the original language. So all we need to see is, or all we're adding is restricted to and taking out for, is that correct?
No.
No? Okay, why don't you read it to me? Sorry, and I'll just try to, is it as measured?
So as
By-
measured by
Mhm.
student performance on a standards assessment restricted to those students who were taught by the teacher a full academic year. So to remove for the teacher students and put restricted to those students.
Yeah, oh, restricted by the teacher. No, taught by,
Taught by the teacher for a full academic year.
okay.
So you're removing for the teacher
Okay, taught for a full academic year that way?
and restricted. I can't see what you're doing.
No.
Oh, you
actually.
guys can't, sorry. It's
So,
because
I'm just waiting for something to move.
you're right. I'm doing it separate because I'm trying to read see the language at the same time. It's hard to share screen, edit. That's why normally in board meeting, you never see me share screen because I need two screens. Sorry. Maybe, sure. Would you, actually, I'm okay right now, but you could help me with the motion. Yeah. Okay.
Restricted to those students.
So it will, see, this is why I now can't see the language the way it is because is that the way it reads?
Oh, yeah, I see it below. The highlighting was missing. Yeah, restricted to those students who were taught, by the teacher. You have to, yeah, that disappeared. That's already in there. So that wasn't a change.
Right. So really, it is only changing or adding restricted to those. I
Yeah.
mean,
That was a
It's-
request. It was to clarify language. Both Member Davis, Member Green, and Member Bogus liked that language. So if it doesn't change anything, I'm just trying to honor some of the work since they send it back to us.
mhm. And I don't know if you want to ask Aaron if that language would change anything technically or if that works.
Well, weren't we just told that we were supposed to, that the focus was on identifying the teachers who were eligible? And this actually changes the focus to what students are eligible.
I think it's blend.
I'm confused as to why the original motion isn't more accurate.
Aaron, can you weigh in on this?
Absolutely. As I read it, this language and the previous language do
Okay,
the same thing.
okay, I think I get it now.
Can I just,
That was my intent.
can I ask just a tedious kind of question? Do you think it's important to, and again, keeping the focus on the teacher, so maybe this is just a dumb question, but do we need to reference what a full academic year means? Or is that just left to the business rules?
Do you want to say as defined in
That's what I'm
blah, blah,
wondering,
blah?
if
That's
we
what
need to
I'm
do
asking.
that,
That's
or-
what I'm just wondering if it matters that much.
Aaron, is it common that LEAs know?
That the full academic year is 160 out of the 180 days?
Yes, this is a very common known
And,
element.
and I agree, it is fully known by people who work with data. But when a teacher pulls this out and reads it, I don't know that they know. It's common for the data people, but if a teacher is wondering if they're eligible, I don't know that they would.
I'm not sure if it's in business rules, though, if you have a good reference point. So-
Yeah, if it's
Well,
not stated somewhere,
Let's get we have a motion that's before the committee. Let me read that and then we can have discussion to that and possible amendments, it sounds like. So the motion before the committee is that the committee amend lines 56 through 57 to read as follows. Subsection B, as measured by student performance on a standards assessment restricted to those students who were taught by the teacher for a full academic year. So if there's additional discussion or amendments to this, we're happy to hear those. Remember, your mic is on, but I'm not sure.
No,
Let's just take a second to process.
I don't feel the need to amend it, but I think Molly makes a good point. So I'm just sort of not certain.
Vice Chair Carey.
I was gonna, I know we don't do formal rule, but I just want.
You're welcome to call the question. If we don't have any comments, we have these thoughts, but
If it was easy, I would make the amendment.
get your mic on. So, I mean, we've got people hearing
If
here.
it was easy and somebody said, oh yeah, we just throw in this reference, then yeah. But if it's kind of buried in some data standards working inside document, then just let the teachers ask who they need to ask.
I believe we're ready to vote. Aaron, do you have information that will blow all of our minds?
No, I was just going to give the reference. Full academic year is defined in the accountability manual on page 9. So the Utah Accountability Technical Manual on page 9.
I think we're good.
We're
Thank
ready
you.
to vote.
Thank you. Okay. The motion before the committee is that the committee amends lines 56 to 57 to read as follows. And this is subsection B, as measured by student performance on a standards assessment restricted to those students who were taught by the teacher for a full academic year. All in favor say aye. And I am a no on this one. So that passes 4-1. Thank you, committee members. That's right. We've got an underlying motion here. Please, member Lear.
I move that the committee approve R277925 draft 1, still draft 1, as amended on first reading forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee approve R277-925 draft 1 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Discussion of this motion. I'm just going to explain my vote because I have some weird looks going on. I prefer the simplicity of the language that was there before. I understand that this doesn't change anything that has just passed. And if it doesn't change anything, why make it? Why add things anyway? So it's not I don't want to do a revote or anything. But anyway, that was my vote against. So I speak in favor of this motion. The passing the rule. Yeah, I'm speaking in favor of this. I'm explaining why I voted no on the first one and speaking in favor of the one that's on the floor. So the motion before the committee is that the committee approve R277-925 draft 1 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay.
I'm an aye.
That passes unanimously. Thank you. Let's move on to agenda item 2.3, R277-126, Utah Fits All Scholarship Appeals. This is a new rule and we have Ben Rasmussen here to cue us up. Ben.
Thank you, Chair. Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. This rule is required by the Utah Fits All Scholarship Bill that the legislature passed in the last legislative session. They had a specific requirement that there should be an appeals process for parents who wanted to challenge administrative decisions made by the program manager that is put in place by contract. The one specific thing they provided about this process was that it should be completed from beginning to end within 30 days. So it doesn't leave us a lot of latitude to have a very complex process. So basically what we've put in place in this rule, or attempted to put in place, is that the parent sends a appeal to their program manager. The program manager forwards the appeal to the board within 2 days, and then board staff, in this case, I think the anticipation is that we will ask the assistant attorney generals to handle this responsibility, at least until we kind of see the kind of volume that we're dealing with. The board staff would review the appeal, make sure that the program manager has acted within the law and within the program rules, and would rule on the appeal. That was the best way we could think of to do it within 30 days, because there's really not a lot of time to involve the board or to involve a review committee or anything like that. So that is what is being proposed in this rule, is a 30-day review that goes through board staff to make sure that the program manager is in compliance with the law. And we're happy to answer any questions you have about the proposal.
Thank you, Ben. We have Member Hart and then Vice Chair Carey after that.
So I have a couple of questions. What type of decisions could be, just a preview of coming attractions, what could be appealed, or what are we talking about?
I think most likely it would be a decision on whether or not a student gets a scholarship would be an administrative decision, or maybe whether they get approval for a particular expense once approved.
Okay.
Those types of decisions.
Okay. It's my second question, if I may, is there a way that we could make this simpler so that, can there be some sort of system where they submit their appeal to both the program administrator and whoever we're having do this at the same time?
I think what we anticipated is this would work well, because then the program manager can also send their response along with the form, because the staff will need that to properly rule on the appeal. So I think to me, that seems like it's the most efficient way, as it allows the program manager to jump into the process as they need to and send their response at the same time.
But I'm concerned that we won't get them. I mean, I'm not trying to assume ill intent. I'm just trying to limit our risk and create some sort of redundancy.
Well, that would be if the program manager didn't forward them along, they'd be in breach of their contract, and they'd be at risk of losing their contract.
But we won't find out about it till too late.
Well, I think we would have the authority to take up the appeal if it wasn't sent to us timely.
All right.
We wouldn't hold that against the parents, would be my.
Oh, no, I don't mean
be
to
my
hold it
assumption.
against the parents. I just don't want to find out 6 months later that there's been 12 mistakes and we didn't know about it, because we will take the heat for that.
I will say that we talked to another state that has a pretty similar process, and they hadn't received any appeals, was my recollection of this.
Okay. Well,
So
fair.
we're still kind of trying to feel out how many appeals we'll actually get under the process.
Fair. Okay. Thanks.
Does that answer your question, Member Hart?
Yes, very much so.
Sure.
I have a question, actually, but my mic is not.
Yeah, well,
Just said real quick.
Yeah.
Mostly, I was just going to state, we've talked to 2 different states that have appeals processes and programs similar to this. And interestingly, they both said that they hadn't actually received official appeals, but that having the appeals process itself adds to that pressure of the informal appeals between the parent and the program manager. So that was a different state with a little bit different model. They just said, because there's an appeals model at the SEA, the program manager has an incentive to resolve the issue actually before it makes it as an appeal.
Thank you. Vice Chair Carey.
Yeah, I do intend to make several motions on this application, but Ben, before I do that, the 30 days, is that by statute? Is that what you referenced?
Yeah, the statute says the whole process has to be completed within 30 days.
Okay, my concern is, and I think we addressed this actually yesterday when we talked about the UPAC referral and it being a 72-hour turnaround. And the consensus of the board was that was quick. And then I'm looking here and it says the program manager on line 28 or 29 wouldn't even have the 3 days, it would be 48 hours. But I understand because now we have to operate within 30
Well,
days.
and there's another key distinction with the UPAC referrals. Those are something that usually we're asking the LEAs to investigate first. They have a lot of work to do to turn those around. With the program manager, I don't think that there's nearly the type of expectation that they would have to do that kind of work to turn this around and send us the appeal. They just need to basically send the appeal, any response they have, which they would be already aware of and have been involved in the process. So I don't think there's the same kind of issues for turnaround as you would see with a UPAC allegation.
But you would agree that we just don't know, right? Because this is something new.
I think we can add, we can, I don't know that I would agree with that. No, I think the turnaround for the program manager, I think would be pretty quick, even if I think it would be pretty quick.
Based on what?
Well, based on what's expected. They're basically turning over the appeal form that the parent fills out and a response. I don't think that takes more than 48 hours to complete.
Okay, so.
Oh, because my.
I was just going to add, they would have already rejected generally either the student's eligibility or rejected the expense. So they would have already had some sort of determination that they made and notice they would have given to the parent that it has been denied, which seems to be the evidence that I think UPAC, as Ben has stated, this is a brand new issue that would be brand new to the LEA to know that there's this allegation, where the program manager would have a lot of evidence because they would have already received a request, it would have been denied, they would have notified the parent, and that's when the appeal actually occurs.
So if this is just a pass through, if the expectation is that the program manager isn't looking at this appeal at all, they're just getting it and saying, okay, now I'm just going to pass it on. Does the statute require us to have it go through the program manager?
The statute does not require it to go through the program manager. We felt that was the best way to handle it administratively, because that would be the parent would be familiar with them, would know how to contact them a lot easier than finding the contact for someone here at the state board.
So the expectation isn't that the program manager looks at any additional or new material that the parent has submitted, but rather familiarity with the process, the contact. So we are not asking the program manager to reconsider. It's rather familiarity. They're getting it and they're just passing it on.
They're the administrative conduit to send it to us.
One other thing to mention, we talked about this as staff and the fact that we were not provided an FTE at the USBE level to manage the appeal process or even to have a full FTE person. That's the point person for the scholarship program, and that the program manager is going to have about $2.5 million a year to administer. So we felt like they had the staff capacity to collect, send that on. And they also have the people. Interestingly, in New Hampshire, their scholarship program is smaller than ours. They served about 4,200 students this last year, and they do have a full-time FTE at the SEA level. And their appeals process is fully with the program manager, not at the SEA level. Other states with these similar programs do have staff at like their equivalent of USBE. So that staffing issue and the fact that we did not get an FTE was another consideration on why we structured it this way.
So, yeah, you want me to make my motions? I can make it. So I have 3 separate motions. The first one is on line 29. We replace within 2 business days to within 5 business days.
Do you want to combine these motions or do you want to do them one at a time? Vice Chair Carey?
We can just take them one at a time.
Okay, so the motion before the committee is that the committee amend line 29 to change 2 business days to 5 business days. And do you want to speak to that, Vice Chair Carey?
Yeah, I just think that 2 business days, even to receive it and then process it within the system and get it out, 2 days does not seem to be, even if they're not reconsidering it, they certainly have to open it, print it, whatever they do with it, classify it, turn around, and then push it out the door. I don't imagine these are 2 full business days. I imagine they're getting it with their regular mail, with their emails. So I don't look at it as realistic for them to process this within 2 business days.
Member Lear?
And I wanted to stay in queue for a question or two, but I'm fine about this. I just feel like the 2 business days disadvantages the parent who wants this problem solved. So and the issue addressed. So I'm fine about 5 business days. I just sort of am surprised that you'd want to disadvantage the parent or delay the parent getting what she wants.
It's a legitimate concern. What would this do? Can I refer a question to staff? What would this do changing and adding 3 additional business days, right? Which could be up to an entire week if it straddles a weekend, right?
So it's still going to be a 30-day turnaround because the statute requires that. Basically, if we change it from 2 business days to 5 business days to transmit it to USBE, that just gives our staff less time to rule on the appeal. Takes it from 28 days we have to get it done within 30 days, no matter what the time frame is. So I still think this is probably workable because it's not we still have a few weeks to turn it around, but the only practical effect is it gives staff less time.
So, but you're saying if we gave the agency, not the agency, who's the program manager, if we gave them 20 days, we'd only have 10, right? Because we only get 30 cap.
Yeah,
Okay.
The longer the program manager has, the less time staff has.
Okay. Member there, I know you have questions. Did you
I'm
have another
fine.
comment
No,
on this?
I'm fine. It just, I anticipate that most of these would be really simple. And though the agency has 30 days, I think that they will probably turn them around more quickly unless there's a huge number of disagreements between the program, which I don't see happening.
Agreed.
So like I said, I would want to advantage the parents to the greatest extent possible, but I don't see a huge difference between 2 and 5. And I'm fine about that. If people smarter about this voucher than I am, think that's the best way to go.
Okay, thank you. So the motion before the committee is,
I do have a
oh,
comment.
I'm sorry, Member.
So
Clement.
I do have a concern with the 2 to 5, because when you read if you read the statute, it says, that the resolution must occur within 30 days after the day of the appeal. So the appeal comes in, that clock starts ticking. You have 5 business days. Now, if it comes in on a Wednesday, you add in Saturday, Sunday, you've done a week is gone now. Now you're into 3 weeks. So you're disadvantaging a parent and you're disadvantaging our staff that who knows what we're in the middle of at the same time.
To clarify, the parent is not disadvantaged. The parent's going to get their response within 30 days, no matter what.
Okay.
It's just staff that has less time.
Okay. Get it within 10 if it turns out that you guys are.
If staff was
Okay.
incredibly efficient,
I
that is correct.
appreciate that. So anyway, I think that the business days and the 30 days, it's 2 different models here. We're looking at business days versus this is a 30-day count, period. That's all you've got.
Any thoughts, Vice Chair Carey, as to changing 2 business days to 5 days, or is 5 business days strategic or something is this a consideration that you've already gone over? I don't want to have the same conversations that you've already had.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the concerns that have been expressed to me were that the 2 days is tough. Now, the parent apparently has 10 days to file the request. Does that count against the 30?
No. And one thing
Okay.
else, other thing I would point out is we ran this rule by the program manager that the board has approved. The program manager didn't have any concern with the 2 days. They were very comfortable with the process. I probably should have pointed that out earlier, but so no.
Now, what is the penalty if the program manager doesn't make the turnaround in the 2-day period?
That would be up to the attorneys. Depends on I'd have to see what the contract says their penalties for breach of contract are. It would be dependent on what their contract language is.
Okay, thank you. So the motion before the committee is that the committee amend line 29 to change 2 business days to 5 business days. Remember, there your light is on. Is this for something else?
Another.
Okay, so if we're ready to vote, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed? So that passes 4-1 with member Wood in opposition. Thank you. Before we go to your next motion, we have a question from member Lear.
Actually, I have a motion
Oh.
too, that's just very simple, but so I'm fine to wait and,
Let's get another one from member Vice Chair Carey, and then we'll.
so you want me to turn this off, Matt, is it?
Yeah,
Why
because the mics, I always, if you have a question, I'm always happy to answer it, but I'll know that you're in the queue. And it does leave the camera on you, which would be better than me, so maybe leave it on. Vice Chair Carey, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was concerned that you're taking these decisions and you're removing it from the elected officials at the USBE. And my concern with that is it's a new program, a lot of passion on both sides behind the program. But Director Rasmussen, you pointing out that, hey, we only have 30 days. And this board can't order lunch within 30 days. So when I saw that, I thought, okay, now it makes sense why staff is doing it. So, yeah. But what I would like to see, and Angie, you're the expert with statutory language, is there a provision we can include that basically as these come into this committee or subset, that the board is notified of basically the time they arrived, the issue, and the disposition. So we're given that summary either on a monthly basis or bi-quarterly, again, depending on the volume. But that way, I know that I'm in a position to report to my constituents, hey, the program is working as intended, or wow, there's a spike in appeals. And I'm getting that in a consistent prescribed timeline.
Looks like Angie's putting some language in there. I was going to suggest that you could even just direct staff to have a information item in committee every month or every 3 months or however often you wanted to put. I don't know that you need to put that in the rule personally, but
Could it
that would be an
could it
option too.
be as simple, because we get updates from different committees via email quite regularly. Would that be sufficient?
Yeah, I'm just
Vice Chair
looking,
Carey.
yes, I'm not looking to create a lot. I know whatever we ask creates work, but I'm looking for the route that will get us the information with the least amount of effort by staff as possible. And if that's email, then I'm fine with that. But again, at least then we have that constant flow of information coming from the decisions made by the committee or group that's tasked to do this.
So let's look on the screen here. I don't know if this is how much of a motion it is, but take a look at that. And then remember, Lear, you had a comment.
I just wondered if we couldn't summarize and not have to list everything. Just, to me, it seems like a report that's similar to the Excel spreadsheet that we get from the audit hotline. And so I can provide a quarterly report via email with information regarding appeals or, something like that. Does that satisfy you, Member Carey?
Yeah, as long as, yes. And again, it doesn't need to be itemized, but what I'm really looking for is just a metric on the process. What is our turnaround time in deciding those? And again, it could be the average and the type of appeals we're seeing, because that would allow us as a board to hone in and say, hey, maybe we need to talk to the program manager about the way they're handling this particular item because it appears to be reoccurring. That's my objective on this.
Does this motion, because we would add this to the rule, does this motion satisfy your intent?
Yeah.
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 I agree. I just think and then we can see if Member Carey wants more detail, then when we start getting it, then he can get it.
Yeah, that's perfect. That works. Thank you.
Do you want to go ahead and make that motion?
Sure. I'd like to make a motion to amend that the committee add the following after line 40, paragraph 8, the superintendent shall provide a quarterly report to the board via email with information regarding appeals.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carey. The motion before the committee is that the committee add the following after line 40, paragraph 8, the superintendent shall provide a quarterly report to the board via email with information regarding appeals. Seeing no discussion to that, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Okay, Member Lear.
I want to say that I had that same thought about, because as I read the statute, it said the board, and then I thought that Ben's explanation was really helpful in terms of we want to handle these quickly and the board can't handle them quickly. So I appreciate that explanation. I had one simple, and I also expected a way more complex. When I saw this was on the agenda, I got a headache. And I thought I was going to see parties of the first part and all that stuff. So I appreciate this is really simple. And I think that they will probably be processed more quickly than 30 days, which is a good thing because it won't become highly legalistic or time consuming. Having said all of that, I just wanted one simple amendment on, I think it's line 24. And we could say that it sort of almost goes without saying, but I want to be really clear, I think, on this one issue. And I would add on line 24, notify a parent of the right to file a written request under this section.
So the motion before the committee is that the committee amend line 24 to specify written request instead of request. Does that fit your?
That
that's
is
your
great.
motion?
And I think that in my mind, that covers email, that covers anything that is memorialized in writing, not just, hey, program manager, I don't like your decision, and then expect something to happen.
Yeah. I'll ask staff, but go ahead, Member Hart, and then I'll ask my question.
Well, can you toggle to that line, whoever's got the screen, so that I can see it in context?
Perfect. And then staff, is there, sometimes there's, as we look at this and we add a word, it doesn't change a whole lot seemingly, but somewhere in the recesses of somebody's imagination, it could change things. This seems to me pretty comfortable.
I don't see any issue with that.
Okay.
That amendment.
Thank you.
That makes
Vice-
sense.
Vice Chair Carey.
Yeah, just I am in favor of the motion. My question is, and I should have, the appeals process, and Board Member Lear's question just made me think of this. The organizations and entities that you've interviewed and spoken with, is this generally a form they have on a computer? Like they're not sitting at home on a typewriter or computer saying, this is my complaint. They're going to a form on a website, or not?
So the rule specifies the program manager will create that form for the parent to fill out.
Okay. Yeah, then,
Line 25.
so I have a question for the maker of the motion. Is it that is it that the request has to be in writing to the program manager? Is that,
Yes.
would it make more sense to say notify a parent in writing of the right to file a request?
That's not what I'm intending. I'm intending that the parent's request is in writing.
That's what, okay.
Order
To-
of Lear. I
Right.
think you might want to make your motion on 24 and 26.
And I actually thought about that and then I didn't know if I wanted to belabor it. So
Because 26 is where it says the parent shall file. the
file a
request.
written request. Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying, Ben. Yeah. Yes, that's not where I also thought it should go, but that's maybe a better place to put it. It may be, if you fill out a form, it's sort of, is sort of repetitive to say a written request, but I just want parents to understand that they're going to have to put this in writing. They're not going to be able to, even if it becomes a very casual relationship between parent and program manager, you can't just mention it. You're going to have to put it in writing. Does that, am I belaboring an obvious point? I don't know. I feel like letting parents know that they have to be,
So
fill
you're,
out the form or put it in writing or,
so you're saying when they're given the program information, they're told that that concerns have to be in writing.
and no,
And then
I'm-
when they do the process, they get a form.
and I don't care so much about the first, but I'm concerned when they make their appeal, it has to be in writing. So if 26 is better, shall file a written request with the program manager within 10 days is probably a better way to put it. And I'm fine about that. I just want to make sure parents are clear. It has to be in writing. And yes, there'll probably be a form. I saw that. All that's true, but they can't just mention it or, but with phone call, it's got to be a written request. So line 26 is probably better. So that would be my motion.
So we'll amend the motion. Okay,
right.
perfect. So the motion before the committee is that the committee amend line 26 to specify written request instead of request. Additional discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
And it one more,
Those
just,
opposed? Sounds unanimous. Perfect. Member Lear, back to
and I
you.
just had one more question and I don't, again, given that I've been persuaded that the simplicity of this is good. As this is more of a question, I don't have a motion, but, there was a place and I think I don't know if I've had a line, on line 38, let's see let me remind myself. And all I'm asking you is, do we think for now this is overkill? In what I'm asking, that the superintendent should provide notice in writing to the parent and the program manager of the decision. Do you think there's any value in the superintendent being required to provide a rationale or findings or anything like that? Or do you think it's fine the way it is, given that we're trying to do this in a prompt fashion?
I mean, I think it's inherent. I would interpret that to mean that they would send a letter and say, this is our ruling and this is why. I mean, if you think that needs to be more explicit, we could make it more explicit, but it would be my assumption that they would provide that rationale
I'm
with the
great.
existing language.
I'm great with that explanation. I had that thought as I read through this. Thank you.
No, no 2-word letters, not approved. Yeah, it's just one word.
It's sometimes like we get, the either or kind of thing. I don't think they need 2 pages, but no, this is disapproved is
Yeah.
not helpful either. So
Agreed.
I think if we can try this and see how it goes. Thanks.
Seeing no further discussion.
I just have a
Member
question,
Ward,
and
thank
this is not referring to this rule. Well, it's in terms of the statute. where it talks about that if we find that they are out of breach of contract of something, that we can bar them for certain activities. But then it says that the program manager also has an appeal. Where do they appeal if they don't like us, what we decided? Where does that appeal go?
If the parent doesn't like how.
No, so this is not related to this appeal process. I'm just trying to, so a general question, yeah. So on line D2, see 3D2 in the statute, it talks about that the program manager has an appeal. A program manager may appeal a decision of the state board. Where do they go?
That would probably be something in court. I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with a particular provision. Angie looks like she's pulling it up, but if they're appealing the board's decision, that would usually go to a court.
Oh, okay.
I'm thinking maybe, I believe we have a rule that talks about procedural, appeals. It could probably come to the full board, because where the disbarment would likely come from is a violation of the contract. So that would be handled through Adam Hurd and team.
Okay.
And then they might say, we're going to terminate this contract because of ABC wrongdoing, right?
Yes.
And then I would imagine that could potentially be filed with the board, but this wouldn't be the right rule for that.
Oh, I know. I just was trying to figure out what's after this. So you have
Yes.
this because in the statute, they have the ability to go to the next level.
Mhm.
And I just was wondering who's beyond us.
We could probably take this offline it's not
That's
relative.
fine.
Yeah, in general, the board has rulemaking regarding this, but because obviously the structure of this program is very intentionally meant to provide the majority of the administration is with the program manager. I think just as staff and the board, we were a little cautious to add additional requirements beyond the statute for now. Doesn't mean that if something comes up in the future and we see, oh, this is a problem, so now maybe we would address something in board rule, or we would ask the legislature if they wanted to address it in Utah code. That's just been a little bit of hopefully an understanding of why we aren't proactively promulgating a lot of rules on this program. It's been
appreciate
more of
that.
a less is more approach.
Yeah, it seems, right now I feel like the rule is in good faith, that this is a simple fix. Here's the misunderstanding. This is what you need to do. But there is that part in statute where there are more levels that we don't clarify. So hopefully we don't have to. So thank you.
Thank you, Member Wood. I would entertain a motion, an underlying motion. Vice Chair Carey.
I make a motion that the committee approve R277-126 draft 1 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carey. The motion on the floor is that the committee approve R277-126 draft 1 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you, committee members and staff. Got some good things done here. So let's move to agenda item 2.4, data sharing for charter school marketing and potential amendments to R277-487, public school data confidentiality and disclosure. And we have Katie Chalice, who's going to start us off.
Remember, I was going to give
Oh.
just a brief.
Actually, yeah, we're going to turn time over to Angie.
Yes, thank you. Just a little brief background on this item. This was a request from outside entities for the board to consider whether the board would support facilitating or providing opportunities for it came from the early college, high school, charter schools, but it would, as I think we've mentioned, be about LEA sharing of data, all LEAs, not solely charter schools, not solely the early college charter schools, being able to share data for purposes of some say marketing, others say, to allow families and parents to understand educational options. And so board leadership asked us to do some research on that, and Katie Chalice took the lead on brainstorming and identifying some options that the board could consider codifying in a board rule. It may be 487 since we created this agenda item, we think it could actually be in a different rule than 487. So when we get to any motions later on, just know that whatever option this committee provides or recommends could be codified in 487, but it might be in another.
This is a discussion item for rule of emotions today.
Correct. However, there could be a motion saying directing staff. You don't need to direct staff to create a board rule, but yeah, there could be other motions, but not action on a rule or anything that would go to the board. It would just be direction to staff if you made any motions.
Thank you. Katie, talk to us about data privacy. This is what your background is, right?
Sure. Chair, would you like me to kind of walk through some of the
You want to walk through, can you walk through the options for us?
I'm happy
Please.
to do that. Yeah. Katie Chalice, Director of Privacy. And as I was mentioned, I drafted this document, but this is not comprehensive by any means. These are just kind of some of the thoughts that we had talked through as staff. So option one would be a sort of status quo. This is, as you've heard in public comment, charter schools are currently seeking information from LEAs. Historically, those primarily districts, I guess I should say. Historically, that information has been shared, and in recent years, there's been it's more common that the districts are declining to honor those requests. But that is an option to just maintain status quo. A second option, option two, is that USBE would provide contact information. And I want to honor, especially based on public comment, the way I've written this document is an emphasis on districts providing information to charter schools, but I want to make it clear that, like, at the committee's discretion, that wouldn't necessarily be that limitation. We could be talking about contact information from any LEA to another LEA. So anyway, just to clarify, but the language I've used in option two is that USBE provides the information to these requesting charter schools. What this would look like is USBE would need to collect additional information than what we currently collect. Specifically, we would need to know which students have been opted out of directory information disclosure, which we don't currently collect. Additionally, this would require, if we went with this option, LEAs would need to be required to consider mailing addresses as directory information. And right now they have the discretion to not do that. So there are many of our LEAs, especially charter schools, who don't consider address to be directory information. So there would be that extra level there. But it's feasible. It could happen. Option three would be a parent consent option. So rather than going the directory information route, LEAs would actively ask parents, hey, how would you feel about receiving information about education programs in your community? Parents would opt in, and then that opt-in decision would be communicated to USBE. Is the difference between that one and the directory information option clear? I'm reading body language from Member Lear in particular. Okay. Okay. All right. And then option four, which, to be completely clear, I have never heard anyone say that they like option four, but there is a model in Massachusetts that utilizes a third party, and this prevents the SEA from being involved in any way. That is the one benefit to option four, is it allows for the data sharing to take place without the state board being involved. And that concludes my summary.
Yes. Thank you, Katie. Yes, questions, Member Lear. Will you hit your mic?
I was not aware under option two. Not only, I was not aware that this, maybe this is my misunderstanding. I was not aware that the state had directory information on individual students. Aside from the opt-out, opt-in possibility. Does the state have directory information on individual students?
Yeah, Chair, may I respond to that question?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I would say in general, yes. So, and I remember earlier, I think you know this already, but I'll just say this for the committee's benefit. FERPA designates, I think they list maybe like 12 items of information that can be considered directory information. And then each LEA gets to choose like, yes, we consider that directory. Yes, we consider that, but not this and not that. All of the items that off the top of my head that are included, well, with the exception of parent name, I'm running through that list mentally, and I believe that USB collects most of that information. So examples are student name, student address. Oh, we don't collect email address, so that's definitely not something we collect. But I would say the majority of them, and specifically the information that is for consideration here would be mailing address. And we do collect that. However, it is an optional field in UTREX. So if the board wanted to move in this direction, then we would need to require LEAs to submit mailing address via UTREX.
Interesting. I didn't know that they had, that again, Big Brother had all of that directory information on individual students.
Right. Yeah. And we don't collect it for the purpose of disclosing it in a directory fashion. This would, I texted Angie yesterday and I said, I'm nervous that I'm going to let my feelings show through, but I am going to let you know from a privacy perspective, this is a little bit, option 2 is a little concerning to me because we are historically not in the business of disclosing information according to the directory information exception. We disclose information, USB discloses information for the studies exception, for the audit and evaluation exception. But we've never been in this business. So this would be a significant diversion from our current practices.
Just a quick follow-up, Matt, to that. So does it have to be provided by LEAs annually? I mean, it seems to me, unless there's some annual update by LEAs, this could get woefully out of date, could be inaccurate, could be incomplete, because there's so much more mobility these days. Is it an annual requirement?
So UTREX is collected, most LEAs do a nightly upload for UTREX, but USBE, and if Aaron is still on deck, he could maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but we only necessitate collections 3 times a year. So at a minimum, they would need to make sure that information was
theoretically, at least, if they do if LEAs do what we're asking them to do.
Right.
Thank you. Yeah. That's all I had for now. This is it.
In the absence of the chair, I'm just going to ask my question. Under the student data backpack, which I know we probably don't want to bring up, but would that information be collected under the student data backpack rule? I know we haven't completely implemented that because of systems issues, but would it be?
Oh, that's a good question. And we have Director Jared Felt on deck. I don't know, maybe Jared, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so.
Chair, could Jared speak?
Oh, sorry. Chair, is that okay?
Of course you can, Jared. We've been waiting for you.
Thank you. Yeah, so that would be collected as part of the student data backpack, but really we already collect it now. In the UTREX spec, like as Katie said, we collect the physical address, which is required, but the mailing address is optional. So we would if you board wanted to make the mailing address required, we can do that as well. It would take some effort on the LEA side. The SIS systems would need to work with our requirement to do that. So
what about the email address?
The email address is as Katie mentioned, we don't collect that, but it's just not part of the UTREX spec. So even in the USIM system, we would not collect that unless the board specified that we needed to.
Do we not know where, I mean, we tax people. Do we not know where our students are anyway, whether they put the mailing address in there or not?
That would be at the LEA level. We at the state level, we don't collect that information.
But if sorry, just a follow up. But if we did start collecting it, the LEA would Let's say, well, of course we know where it is.
Correct.
I mean, the LEA has to know where their students are, right?
Oh, well, they do,
Yeah.
but whether or not it's
But
sent
we're
up.
saying on the state level,
or-
so the
or
information's out
verified.
there. But I guess this is part of the conversation, right? Do we want to say, well, I know you have the information. Now you have to share it with us.
Give it to us, or you have to give it to other LEAs.
Well, that's kind of the question, but I'm just saying, we know the data is out there. We
Right.
know the information is out there. Whether or not we want to take it or ask for it is the part of the question. Is
Well,
that
not only
accurate?
that, the student data backpack rule has existed for a long time. Well, statute has existed. It's taking some time for very good reasons to get it up and running. But that statute already exists and we have to do that because of state law. That's not a new thing or anything. That's been 10 years, 9 years?
Yeah, Chair, may I speak a little bit to the student data? Oh, I'm sorry.
I've got a question eventually. I just have a comment. It's further discussion.
Well, let's hear from Katie. Was your question answered? Is that? So after Katie, we're going to jump to Member Wood and then we'll go to Member Lear.
I'll say, and Jared, feel free to correct me if I'm misspeaking, but there is a world where we fulfill the student data backpack requirement, which we will, and simultaneously not collect that information, like store it at USB. So my preference is a pass-through model where it goes from one LEA to another. We're not actually housing it here. I don't know if that's relevant.
Yes, my recollection of the legal requirements, Vice Chair Hart, is that that is a requirement on the LEA to have the student achievement backpack. It doesn't necessarily mean that USBE has to be the mechanism for it or to store the information, but maybe to help support the LEAs storing the information.
One of my main concerns is the cost to the LEAs, all LEAs, not just traditional LEAs, charters, on keeping or, I've got concerns about data reliability. I want data that are put into the systems at the local level to be clean. I want the data at the state level to be clean. And I'm just interested as part of this discussion, how much it will cost all LEAs, all models of school to keep this data accurately. So I understand to me, it's not relevant whether or not it's passed through or, although that's very good information, it's more, I'm thinking about the time and therefore monetary costs of this whole endeavor. That's just another avenue that's on my mind. So if LEAs are already expected, LEAs and schools are already expected to keep this data because of an existing statute, then that is one piece of the puzzle for me. So that's all I was thinking.
Thank you, Member Hart. Member Wood.
I had a question, and it's probably for Deputy Superintendent Stallings because she has the brain that knows all things legislative. Is there something that changed, whether it was some of the student privacy bills with Senator Andrick? Is there something that changed that would have stopped these LEAs, the districts, from sharing out? Where they're saying it was a common practice and then it just stopped? But I know he's had like 3 or 4 different revisions of his bill.
Yeah, I don't believe it was, I'm guessing here. I don't believe it was a legislative change, but I do know, like, one of our roles as the student data privacy team at USBE is to do a lot of training with LEAs. And I'm proud to say that they are increasingly conscientious of student data privacy. So I'm guessing that's probably what it is. They just are better understanding that they have discretion and they're more cautious in their sharing.
And if I could add, I was going to say that as LEAs have been also more cautious, I think there's been more community pressure or families who are saying, we don't want data to be disclosed. So it could be that they're also either understanding the data privacy practices, but also maybe their communities are requesting less data to either be collected or shared. And if it's optional, then, they feel like they have to and I don't know that it's optional because it sounds like there's been a couple of differences of opinion on whether it's optional or not. But if it is optional, you could see now today versus 10 years ago where an LEA leader might be less likely to just optionally give it data out versus if we required it, it makes it easier on them to not have to feel like they're on the hook for making that decision.
Thank you. Member Lear and then Vice Chair Carey.
And this is really an interesting, this is really an interesting legal issue. I mean, if it didn't matter to anybody, it would be even more interesting. But I found all of the speakers really, the public comments were really compelling and very interesting. But I'm going back to FERPA, which is which would trump any kind of state law anyway. And it says schools may disclose directory information. So I'm hard pressed to want to do any kind of a board rule that even though I found the concerns really compelling, and I wish we were to the point maybe in LEAs, but I'm really reluctant to go beyond what FERPA says and require LEAs to do something when FERPA so clearly says may disclose directory information. So that's just in spirit of conversation. I can't quite get there. And though I found everybody's discussion points really valid and interesting in terms of sharing information.
Response.
Oh, maybe it's because.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Yeah, there is one other option. So I'm going to both address what you said, Member Larry, and also present another option that I didn't include in the document because it didn't occur to me yet. But there is an option where the board could require LEAs to share certain directory information with other LEAs. So it would remove USBE from the picture, but it would establish that requirement. My reading of FERPA is that the LEA has the discretion as to whether or not to disclose that. But I did check with the Student Privacy Policy Office at the Department of Ed. They're the ones who give guidance on FERPA, and they said that there was nothing that would prevent us you as a board from requiring LEAs to make that disclosure. So as written in FERPA, they do have the discretion, but they did confirm that you could make that requirement if you chose to. Yeah, I thought so too.
Thank you. Vice Chair Carey.
Yeah, I just, I think that we should allow this information to be shared among LEAs. My concern is with USBE being the holder of that information. I like the model that public education is local, and for USBE to have the information. And again, I'm just processing this as I've heard the discussions take place. So, yeah, it's something that I'll have to process and work through, because I do think, yes, LEA should be able to share that information, and it would make sense. But again, having that information here and us being the holder of the keys, so to say, even if it's a backup set, I'm not sure if I'm on board with that. But thank you.
I'd like to speak to these as well. I agree with you, Vice Chair Carey. I'd love to see LEAs and charters work together on this and provide options, best options for what families are looking for. Some of my concern, though, is the cost. And I know Vice Chair or Member Hart brought it up here. We don't know what the cost is. And there's those two options. So option one says no cost. Option 4, no cost, but it doesn't sound like very many people want option 1 or 4 anyway. So quite frankly, I don't know I don't know how to jump in and say, hey, I want to direct staff to look at option 3, which is, in my opinion, a great option. But I don't know how to direct staff to say, look at option 3 without looking at cost as well. So I don't know if we're just a little premature here in this meeting. This is why it's a discussion, not an action item. But there might be something that we need to send back to staff to look at. And I know Angie's got her.
Yeah, I just have an idea that the committee could consider potentially directing staff to do an estimate or take a look at the options and maybe talk to some LEAs about what they think it might take to update systems. So that could be in a potential motion, is to direct staff to work. And I drafted that because I was listening to this conversation, and just as an option.
You're efficient.
Member Hart.
I'm very interested in that because, like I said, we just yesterday released an audit on data reliability, and I'm not interested in asking LEAs to do more, LEAs school, all types of school, to do more until we get our hands wrapped around how to ensure accurate data of the data we're currently using. The second point I'd like to make is that I see utility in this. We've characterized this as a charter issue. I was the principal of a school who, in the past, the students in the zone, in the school's attendance zone, chose to go to another district because one district had 6th grade in the elementary and one district had 6th grade in the junior high. That is a choice that I think parents should be able to make, and it's a material difference in how your 6th grader in this case would experience education, and there's clear benefits to both. So I just, in a state that values choice, like we say we do, and the principle of choice, I don't think that I think it's disingenuous to not allow or facilitate that choice. I don't see it as a charter traditional LEA issue. I see it as an issue of choice. The other thing is, I do have to noodle on that quite a bit because it does concern me. And I think the beauty of this, while I think many things in our education system need to change because they're somewhat archaic and pointed towards a world that we don't live in now, I do think that the one thing that we should hold on to is some element of local control, and decisions are best made at a level where the decisions are actually experienced, which is locally in this case. The fact that we think that our data is not held at the state about our students is somewhat preposterous. We got all kinds of data on students. We've got lots of data, and to say that we don't want to be the holder of the data, I'm just not sure that. Yeah, we don't want file folders of cumulative records, but in this day and age, it's hard to distinguish between someone that holds data or simply is able to be a pass-through. I understand and I wrestle with it, but as a person who, for all their life can probably be researched and a biography written based on someone's internet sleuthing. I think we're making a distinction that may not really truly be there, and it just makes us feel better about our data. So I see this as a choice issue. I am truly concerned about the monetary and time costs, and am very interested in that motion. I think we're kind of kidding ourselves about where data exists, or in this case, that it doesn't exist at the state level. That's just my thoughts, because if we were to move an option. I personally like 3, but I think we are definitely not there yet and we need some additional information.
Thank you, Member Hart. Vice Chair Carey.
I have to say, when I received the backup and I saw that there were 4 options, I actually thought we were making progress, because I said, wow, there's 4 of us on law and there's 5 of us on law and licensing, but only 4 proposals. So I thought, wow, that's pretty good. So the only thing that I would, Chair Hymas, I like your motion, but if we can, and obviously it's not a requirement, but if we could tell staff, you know what, don't look at 4, don't look at 1, or whatever they are, then we're reducing the work to staff. So instead of saying, what do we agree on? If there's something we can all say, well, there's no sense to look at this, maybe that would save time for staff. That would be my only suggestion.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carey. Any thoughts from the committee on that kind of direction? I will say that according to this, options 1 and 4 don't have costs. So if we did move forward with this motion to estimate the financial impact, it would probably be primarily focused on option 2 and 3. Is that accurate? Member Lear, you had a comment. And then Member Wood.
I do like the idea of the cost analysis. I see option 3 as being labor intensive. I mean, because the state would have to find out, USBE would have to learn which parents opt out. And I know I'm probably making this less electronic than it would be, but they'd have to find out which parents don't want their data shared and be the repository of that information, which, despite Molly's right, I'm sure she is, then I was one of those fooling myself with that. Oh, they don't have all this information. But I don't think that currently USB does not know which parents would opt out of individual LEA FERPA disclosures. So we'd have to have that. We would, because it is sensitive information and parents are very sensitive about it. It would have to be current. We'd have to make sure we're accurate and current, which, as Molly points out, we don't have a great track record. So that's another piece of information that we have to make sure we were keeping, and it had to be accurate and up to date. So that concerns me. I would like the cost estimate. The third factor, I think I just have to point out that I feel like it's kind of the elephant in the room, is that this is really a catch-22 for the USBE. Parents are very protective of their data, of their children's data. And what we're proposing is to facilitate or require those data to be shared. And that makes me really uncomfortable to be caught in that situation where some parents don't want their data shared. Other parents and obviously school people are saying, you've got to share it because then we can give you more information and more options. So I feel like we're kind of in a no-win situation as the USBE right now in this discussion. So just.
Thank you, Member Lear. Member Wood.
Much of what I was going to say, you said with the 1 and 4 not having costs. I sent out an email to a handful of parents and parent organizations that I connect with, and the overwhelming response back was number 3 from a parent perspective, is that they wanted that option to know whether or not their data was being shared. And so I would appreciate the cost analysis. I like the motion as it stands. I do want to know, one of the public comments was that this is not a marketing issue. That's kind of how it was addressed to us initially, because I'm looking at, if it's not marketing, if it's getting information, I mean, to me, marketing is letting people know who you are and where you are, and that you have something available to them. The next step is that they're already engaged with you and you should already have their data. Because if this is a marketing thing, aren't there other ways that we could require, such as some of the communication methods that districts use, that we require them to open those up to charter schools to be allowed to market on those. I know in Davis School District, we use Peach Jar. I think they also do that in Alpine. Things like that. Are there ways that we can overcome this, back to, I think Ms. Cunningham's suggestion in some conversations too. I mean, we do our part with the cost analysis and stuff, but also, are there other ways? Am I missing something in terms of beyond the marketing aspect?
I would direct that to staff, but I don't know if they have an answer. Katie, you want to take a shot?
I'm guessing, I think it's an interesting question. I think my guess is there would probably not be a strong LEA appetite for opening up that kind of communication. If for no other reason, just because of the logistics of it. So the way Peach Jar works is someone has to go in and enter the information. They send it out and they choose the student groups to send it to. So I see that as, from a privacy perspective, it sounds awesome. But from a logistical point of view, it feels like a less plausible option, perhaps.
When you do a cost analysis, of course, that includes labor. Okay, thank you. Right. Yeah. Yeah. In both LEAs, charters, USB, everywhere. Right. We want to know how much this costs. The state agency, the LEA, the charter, if anything. Right. You might say, well, it doesn't cost this group anything. To Molly's point, district sharing with districts. We want to know all of it. We want to know what we're deciding before we decide it.
One thing I just wanted to maybe recommend, we change to the motion. If you want to do the motion about the staff estimating financial impact, there was the one option that Katie mentioned that she thought of after we had already done the backup, which would be to explicitly require the data sharing instead of it being, of the directory informations. That wasn't one of the options listed, but it might be something to consider including. I've also thought of another one that I hate to verbalize right now because I'm sure there's somebody who's going to say, why did you even mention that as an option? But there's a tool that, anyway, it wouldn't be probably as direct. It wouldn't be proactively getting to the families, but it might be USB facilitating kind of the advertisement, like almost like the Peach Jar opportunity, but us doing it, it might create a lot of logistics. But my point is, if you could say, to estimate options 2, 3, and any other option that staff might consider in the meantime, because I've already thought of one and I know Katie thought of one that you might want to consider. Or maybe even, LEAs, maybe other charter schools or districts. The one I'm thinking of actually came to my mind because of Wendy Hart. She was one of the commenters today and she talked about something that brought something to mind. So
This completely goes against Joe's efficiency of 4.
Well, one quick question is, how far are we along on the parent portal where we're supposed to have the comparison data from Representative Peterson's bill? How far along are we? Because that should be giving access to everything. I mean, you put in your address and every school available to you in your surrounding area. Is that happened yet?
I believe it has, and Aaron that was actually the tool that I was thinking of.
And Aaron just got sicker and went back to bed, probably. Oh, Jared's going to save the day. Oh.
I don't know if Aaron and Jared want to virtually arm wrestle, but either one of you, please.
I'll let Aaron take this one.
Rich.
Oh, thank you. And I did not go back to bed, just working in other meetings and anyway. So the bill from Peterson is going to be incorporated in the USIMS development. So that's not up and running yet. We have until 2024 to get that going. Part of the question is, getting parents connected to the students and how we're going to do it at the state. We're still working through that process. So just so you know, that component of Representative Peterson is not done yet. What's obviously in the project list of things that need to be accomplished, but it's not up and running yet.
So remind me, I understand that we weren't necessarily going to decide, we weren't going to forward action necessarily. Can you remind me what we were going to do?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to slow down any process, but I'm ready to ask for more information, but I don't want to slow down the process. Does that make sense?
Yes.
What were we gonna, what's our objective here?
The best case scenario was that today it would have been a resounding, easily identifiable preference for one of the options, that then we would have brought back a rule draft that would have codified that option. Of course, as staff, we know that we had 4 options there. We could bring option 3 to the committee, but then when it goes to the board, they like option 2 or option 1. So the question is, if there's something that you feel comfortable with, we could bring the rule back, or we could take 1 more month to bring back the financial or the fiscal impacts. So it could potentially delay everything 1 month, right? So, you know, we could either bring the rule back in December, or you bring back the financial information in December, and then you're back to committee with the rule in January, and then the full board in February.
Given that I don't think that even if we were to forward something or ask for a rule to go to the full board next month, I don't think that would end well.
No.
So I think it's more prudent to do a little bit more data gathering and see what bubbles up, because just in a half hour, we've gotten some other solutions that might be more amenable. I am prepared to make this motion, if it's okay with the chair.
I'm good with it. I know we had a few other comments
Oh, I'm
from
sorry.
Vice Chair Carey and then Member Lear, but I would love to get a motion out there. I'm just saying. Okay,
And I just want to say, I'm not ready for a rule. I
Okay.
think we need to have lots more thinking, because this is a pretty, it just, like I said, it's a catch-22, and I don't want to be the bad guy here, and I don't see any.
Come on, Carol.
Carol,
That was,
you
that's been
ran
gone
for
a
the
long
state
time.
board.
Yeah, that's, come
Well,
on.
You are
I-
the
you're
bad guy.
Bad guy in enough ways. I don't
Not
want
only
to
are
add
you
to our
the
bad
bad
guy
guy,
resume, is what I guess.
You are the punching bag too.
Thank you, Member Lear. Member Hart.
I move that the committee direct staff to estimate the financial impact to USBE and LEAs to implement, option 2, 3, and any other option that staff considers appropriate, and requests the updated information, including the policy options and their fiscal impacts, be presented to a committee for further discussion.
Thank you, Member Hart. The motion on the floor is that the committee directs staff to estimate the financial impact to USBE and LEAs to implement options 2, 3, and any other option that staff considers appropriate, and requests the updated information, including the policy options and their fiscal impacts, be presented to a committee for further discussion. Discussion of that motion, Vice Chair Carey.
Just a question. Do we need to put in that we want this returnable in 30 days in the motion? Like, I don't, you know.
They need to sleep.
I know, but yeah, business days well, we gave the program chair 2 days. So, but do we need to put that in? Because what I don't want to have happen is, because we do have stakeholders that are waiting for us to act. I don't want this to go on and we miss something. So does staff have a recommendation for that? Does Molly?
Let's get Angie first and then we'll hear from others. Go ahead.
So my first inclination was, I was assuming it would come back in December, but it really is up to board leadership. So I would think that right now, the way the motion is, board leadership, maybe staff says, oh, we need 2 months, not just one. We could make that case to board leadership and then, our board leadership could say, no, make it happen. It's,
I'd like to amend my motion to add to a committee in, what month is it?
You would know that December.
To a committee in December.
Member Lear.
I'm supportive of this motion, but I am reluctant to rush this. I think this is a really important issue and it involves the USBE's relationship with LEAs of all kinds. And I'm not, unless we heard really, really helpful comments today from 4 people sort of on a short turnaround. So I think we need to hear from more people. And I'm reluctant to say, I'm sympathetic. We don't want this to drag out forever. But I also am really reluctant to say we need to have this cost estimate and we need it yesterday.
So can I,
I'm more interested, just to clarify why I would do that, is I want the conversation to keep moving. And when it's on an agenda, we're more likely to get people to comment because it's on the agenda and it keeps people at the, now if staff came back and said, this is the information we have, but it's not complete, then at that point we say, okay, next month, bring us this information. But I want it on an agenda so that the public knows to come talk to us.
I can live with that. And if we can have just a little bit of an exchange, I can live with that. I just feel like we've had some experiences yesterday where I felt like the input was not as thorough or complete as would have been ideal. I think we need family privacy, data privacy are really important issues. And I don't want to, because this has much bigger implications than marketing or whatever. Because what's the next thing that USBA is supposed to provide, is supposed to facilitate or pass through information about? And that concerns me. So
which is why I wanted it to go to a committee and not to the full board.
But I also want to make sure we involve all stakeholders that are interested and would like to weigh in, like to hear more from the USBA. So just, I'm kind of saying what's obvious, but I think it's that important.
It's out there now. Of course, it's been out there for a little bit, but it's out there now. And correct me if I'm wrong on the timeline, staff. I believe that in this motion, we send it to a committee in December, and ultimately they will be doing what is happening today, only they'll have more information. So they won't be voting on a rule, whoever that committee is, right? They'll be voting on
More
a
information.
more narrow direction for staff, which again would put it into rule phase, which would then come to a committee again, right? I mean, this is not a quick process. Okay, a little bit. Should I convince you a little more? Okay. Vice Chair Carey.
But that raises a question. Why are we saying a committee and not back to law and licensing?
Because when you all of a sudden start talking money, we want to make sure that it's going to the right committee, and I don't want to limit it. It might come back here, but there's also benefit in a different set of eyes.
May go to finance or.
Might go to finance. And then, our agendas can vary widely. And so while this month might be light, next month we could have 22 items. That has not been unheard of to have to meet starting at 8 o'clock. So just leaving the option open. It's clearly a law issue, but it also has implications otherwise. Also, going to another committee means it gets more exposure with board members before it gets to the board meeting. And the more work we can do before a board meeting seems to make those less painful.
No, I was just asking, but if adding a financial component may reduce the amount of things coming here.
Right.
I think we add finance to everything. Okay, thank you.
All right. The motion before the committee is that the committee directs staff to estimate the financial impact to USBE and LEAs to implement options 2, 3, and any other option that staff considers appropriate, and requests the updated information, including the policy options and their fiscal impacts, be presented to a committee in December for further discussion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 2.4 or 2.5, my apologies. This is another discussion item. USDB allowing siblings of deaf and hard of hearing students to attend a USD campus program. And we are fortunate to have Leanne Wood, Member Wood, queue us up for this one. Thank you, Member Wood.
Thank you, Chair Hymas. So following one of the USDB Advisory Committee meetings at the beginning of the year, a parent asked if the Utah School for the Deaf could permit hearing siblings of deaf and hard of hearing students to attend a USD campus program. A formal request was submitted to the Board of Education and USDB on October 2nd, 2023. So currently, hearing siblings are allowed to attend the USDB preschool program, but are not able to continue at the school when they are eligible for kindergarten. Utah Code 53E84016 states that the board shall make rules that determine the eligibility of students to be served by the Utah Schools for the Deaf and Blind, and may make rules to allow a resident of Utah who is neither deaf, blind, nor deafblind to receive services of the Utah Schools for the Deaf and Blind if the resident is younger than 22 years of age. So USDB leadership is recommending that USB create a board rule to allow USDB under certain conditions to enroll hearing siblings of deaf or hard of hearing students currently enrolled in a USDB campus program. So this is coming before our committee today as a discussion item only to flesh out any questions or concerns that we may want to address. Following our discussion, we could direct staff to bring a roll back to committee at a future meeting if we feel that's something we want to move forward with.
Thank you, Member Wood. Not to summarize, because there's a lot of information in there. We've had public comment in the past saying, please let our other children attend school with their siblings. And this is a discussion surrounding that if it's feasible. And we have staff from the USDB here, Joel Coleman and Michelle Channer, and they're here for questions. To answer questions or provide the discussion here. What are our thoughts here? Let me first turn time over to either Michelle or Joel. Anything you want to add to this and what you're hearing? We hear public comment, but we know when one person speaks, there's usually a dozen to 100 or more who have similar thoughts and feelings. But what are you hearing? Anyway, fill us in.
Thank you. So we've always thought this is a good idea. It works very well in preschool. It's not very common to a sibling here or there. We anticipate this would be less than 10 children in any school ever, much less probably. But from time to time, the parents ask us and we always say, yeah, well, the board hasn't really allowed that. And we thought with this most recent parent who requested it really was quite eloquent and thorough. And I thought she captured what parents do ask for here and there over the years. And so I thought, well, why not just bring it to the board and see if they're willing to allow us to do this the way we do in preschool. We sort of see that it might happen in first, second grade with a child here or there. If they were in the class within the strict guardrails that we would put on it as USDB, it would be very helpful to certain children. And if it was ever something that was not in the best interest of the deaf children, then we just wouldn't allow it to happen. So
is there a concern? I appreciate the guardrails. I agree there does need to be strict guardrails. We need to protect the students who we are putting, who are attending there right now. And we don't want this to become just a normal, normal is not the right word, but a standard.
Like a dual immersion program.
Right.
It's not, you're right. It's still the deaf school for the deaf kids.
Along with the parameters, I know I brought this up to you offline. Space. Would that be a factor if, for example, I look at a classroom, I've got 25 seats, I've got 25 kids. can I just tell I'm talking in kindergarten, what's already happening? Do you just say, I'm sorry, we don't have space? You're on like a wait list.
Yeah, we would only allow one child per class at the max
Okay.
that was hearing. And also our classes are usually anywhere from 5 to 7 children anyway.
Okay. Member Hart, I see you have a question.
So my question is, and I'm sure there's an easy answer, I just don't know it. Aren't the teachers special ed certified? Isn't it considered a special ed certification? So does this at all interfere with incidental benefit or like having regular ed kids in a special ed teacher setting? Would it affect or jeopardize any sort of funding?
So that's one of the things often we get actually when we get audits, that we don't have regular ed children in our school. So we kind of have a flip going on. Right? Some stuff we have to report for special ed. How many students do you have that are regular ed? How many students do you have that are special ed? All of our students are special ed. So the benefit to the deaf children is that there is a regular ed student coming into them if that's a benefit to them. So it's kind of the flip that we're going. But as a teacher of the deaf, we teach the general ed curriculum with the adaptations and accommodations that are necessary for a deaf child. And that's not just sign language. The main thing that we're doing is mitigating language gaps, which is it's like much like an ELL student, and which is very beneficial to a regular ed student.
And I have a follow-up, Chair, is that okay? My next question would be, would there be, again, a simple question that I'm sure you already have an answer to. I'm just curious. The cost of additional materials or additional supports, would that strain your budget, or is that something that you've already planned for?
Yeah,
Just speak about that,
This would
please.
be so incidental.
Okay.
We wouldn't need any additional funding. The WPU could follow the student to our school if the board wanted to do that, but it wouldn't even be required for us. Because we're really talking about like a couple more kids in an entire school, you know?
Okay, my last question. Do you see any downsides whatsoever to this proposal?
I think there's cautions that we need to be aware of. I think it's very important because the people that have consternation or concerns, there's some that have consternations that we would make it more like a mainstream program, which we don't want to do. Because if our students benefited from a mainstream program, they'd be in a mainstream program. They specifically choose the School for the Deaf to have that direct communication with teachers and peers. So we've noticed there are an inclination. If your natural language is spoken English, you're going to gravitate to somebody else in the room who's naturally is speaking English. And so what happens sometimes is that these conversations can occur where there's a hard of hearing student, a regular ed student, and they start talking, which seems normal. That's very normal. They want to do that. And there's a context and a time and a place to do that. But if you're the teacher and you're teaching and you are deaf and you see two students and you cannot figure out what they're saying, that can be problematic for the teacher who is deaf. So that's why we say there has to be guardrails. That's why there should be one, because you know, unless you've got some other issues, you pretty much don't talk to yourself like that. So, so there's usually they would interact and they'd be encouraged to interact with the other deaf children. I know there are some children who are what they call SODAs. They're called SODAs, siblings of deaf adults. Board Member Wood is one of those. That sometimes you want to have your space, right? You don't want to have to be the person who's relied upon to be the interpreter. And that can be sometimes challenging for the child, which I would think that the parents would make those decisions, whether this would be the right placement for their child. The context of this one that keeps coming up, and it's come up many, many years in my career, where the parents want their child to have a meaningful relationship with their deaf and hard of hearing child, which we celebrate and want to encourage, because those relationships are going to expand well beyond our 18 years of age. And so we want to nurture those environments and balance the fact that we're not inhibiting the other children. The other thing I thought I'd make mention so you can have context, right now that's allowable within preschool context. We have 3 students at our Deaf South campus in St. George that are siblings that are out there. And we have 2 at KBS in Ogden. JMS, which we're talking about space issues, right? It's really, really hard. We cannot accept any of the preschool students right now. We can't, and we won't allow them in because the primary focus is our deaf and hard of hearing. So there are none at JMS and there are none at EDS, just for capacity reasons and space issues. So we limit that and don't allow them in. If we're able to do it and it's a benefit the children, then we do allow them in.
Vice Chair Hart didn't turn her mic off, so I'm going to use hers. I'll just turn it. What happens when we have a family with a sibling who's on an IEP, and then you have to adjust what you do there, because most of your IEPs are deaf, right? Or blind. And I'm sure that there's other accommodations that come along with them, but I guess my true point here, and this might seem quick to the public, but this has been an ongoing conversation. So I'm not jumping to any conclusions or any decisions here willy-nilly or whatever, but I'm happy to support this if there are very strict parameters. Like I do not want to disrupt the environment at all. And if it is a disruption, then I would want the authority to pluck that student. And I know that parents are going to, because I'd be the same with my kid, like, no, they're fine, just do this, right? And then I'm telling the USDB, just do this. My kid is fine in there, just do this. But I want to protect the integrity of the school system that we have now. I think it's been a long time in the making to what we have. I think good things are happening. And when we start bringing in outside students, it jeopardizes that, right? There's always that risk. So I know you have parameters, but I want to have the ability to say, look, mom, dad, this is not happening. We're removing them for whatever reason. But I don't know if that's feasible, right? I guess I'm saying I'm very protective of the USDB and what the program is. I don't want it to be jeopardized.
I appreciate that.
I think when if the board is interested in approving this, then when we write the rule, those kind of constraints can be put in. We would do that internally anyway. We would jealously guard the purity of the mission of the school. But there would be a lot of I guess, factors that we would look at with any student that was considered, just like we do currently in preschool. And if it's not the right fit, we just wouldn't approve the placement.
Sorry, question, Gary. I'll hit it 3 times. Thank you. What about once the student is already enrolled? I get not taking them in and saying, you know what, we don't have the resources, we can't do this. What happens when they're already in? Is there a metric? Is there a metric in place that we say, no, these are the parameters, you're not meeting them, you've got to go, which is hard. It's very difficult, right? For a family to, in the middle of the year, say, okay, now I have to, it causes problems.
We do set up expectations with the parents, even with the preschool parents. If the space is an issue, we get more deaf students, we're sorry, we're going to have to send your child back. We won't be able to continue with us. And they have responded to that well, understanding that's what it is. We've also had students that have come in preschool who have behavioral problems that has disrupted the classroom, and we've explained to the parent, I'm sorry, it's not to the benefit of the deaf and hard of hearing children. Your child will not be able to attend. They've accepted that well, but we don't just automatically say that to them. We give them a heads up. Hey, we're having some kids coming soon. Be anticipating that this is going to happen. We also have noticed your child's having some behaviors that are, disrupting the classroom. If we can't get those in check, we're going to have to ask the child to leave.
Thank you. Vice Chair Carey.
So Superintendent Coleman and Associate Superintendent Tanner, thank you for being here today. And like Chair Hyman said, I have concerns, but you have done exceptional work. And because of that, I am very reluctant. I want to be more deferential, just in light of the success that you have had at the school. I have visited the campus and met with the superintendent at the Ogden School, and it is exciting what's happening there. Just a few questions. Have you surveyed your existing parents to see what their interest level in this would be, what the opposition would be?
That is our next step. And I'm holding a little bit because you'll notice I sent you all a survey that's going out to parents. And I'm afraid, like if you send them both out at the exact same time, I'm not going to get the information I want for the accreditation, which is a very long survey. This one will be shorter. So I'm hoping I can time it out to get more responses from that survey before I send this one out and say, this one's a lot shorter. So that it's timing issue right now, but absolutely we're intending to survey staff as well as parents. And one of the things like clarifications we may do is to say, are you a deaf parent or are you a hearing parent? Because it actually has a different answer. If you're a deaf parent or a hearing parent.
And any future actions you would take, obviously you would incorporate those responses from, okay.
Yeah.
And then just two other questions. Do you have any research or indication of which percentage of eligible families would likely send a sibling?
Typically, these are hearing parents that are just barely learning sign and they've got one deaf child in the family. And like, as in the case of, this is an excellent case, the one who sent you the email, is that the child, there's no way the child can access sound. And so the parents and the family must adapt. And so they want their child who's little to start learning sign language. That's typically where we get this from. I have seen some requests that come for students that where Member Hymas has referenced, who have another need. For example, their child's autistic and the child's not communicating verbally. There's a very different reason why that child is not communicating as a difference, very different from my deaf and hard of hearing students. And the approaches and the techniques you use are very different. So I want to make sure that we are serving kids that could benefit from our services and that would also benefit the deaf child and not deter from that. So I appreciate the guardrails.
And one final question, Chair. I've read in, I believe it was Board Member Wood who put this memo together perhaps, but I see the word, the siblings used. They can bring a sibling. What if they want to bring, you have 2 or 3 families living together and they're not really a biological sibling, but is sibling a term of art or does it mean biologically related, I guess is my question.
I had someone ask me that too, if it was an adopted sibling. To me, I'd count them as their legal sibling. But if there was somebody by all intents and purposes is a sibling of that family member, we'd have to define that to see if we could consider them.
Would you consider allowing, again, 2 different families living in the same household or maybe 2 related families, not biologically related, but for all other purposes, a brother and sister?
I'd be my preference to limit the people that are living in the household with them they consider siblings. So
Thank you. Thank
we
you,
don't
Chair.
check their legal background to see if it's for sure this is your birth certificate, but yeah.
Understood. Thank you.
And I didn't think I had any questions. And then the discussion starts. And Michelle's really good about choosing your words carefully. But and then I'm looking at Leah, and I kind of had a opposite concern of Matt's, that on the one hand, you've got to preserve the program for deaf children. On the other hand, if this is open to siblings, I don't believe you can discriminate against siblings that have disabilities. So that creates kind of a catch-22, and I use that word a lot today, but it creates kind of a concern that you'd like to be able to pick and choose your siblings, but I don't know that that would be legal. And so that is, so I just raised that concern that I wouldn't want to set up a system that then, created difficulties for the program, had a choice between creating difficulties for the program or being discriminatory. So I'd have to look carefully at what a rule said or a process said that these students are eligible, because I just don't believe that legally we could say maybe even your autistic child is not allowed because it creates additional frustration or creates conditions in that classroom that aren't really helpful. So that's going to be a tough line to walk.
I agree.
So are we, I know this is a discussion and we're not having any motions and I'm not suggesting that we do, but is the point of this discussion, from what I understand, is to get a feel for if we want to move forward with even creating some sort of policy, right? And it sounds like I'm just going to ask the committee, it sounds like we do or we do not. I don't know. I think we have some concerns, but it sounds like you're addressing those concerns and that the USDB itself is willing to move forward with this. And I don't sense any counter or any
I just have some
opposition.
follow-up questions.
Okay, please.
So I want to look at it from the other side. We want to preserve the integrity of the school for our deaf students. I'd like to think about the hearing student for a second. So we have very specific standards in our K through 12 on speaking and listening. And when I went through those last night, I was looking at some of those, speak clearly and audibly while asking and answering questions, present information, stories, or opinions, learn to collaborate. Where and how do you see those specific speaking and listening that are very different from what our deaf and hard of hearing children require and need? How would you see those being fulfilled in this with our hearing students?
Yeah, so we have to address that a question also with our deaf and hard of hearing students. So when that standard came out, it was like, many of my students can't speak or listen, right? So that standard is out there in which all my children will not be able to achieve. Those who can, we obviously give them the opportunities and spend our time getting them better at speaking and listening, because that's something they can explore. So those students would probably be, the hearing students would be associating with that group of students who are also getting those opportunities for speaking and listening. We do have SLPs. We do a lot with speech and listening at our school, a lot. It's a heavier focus at our school, probably at any other school, because if they can, we have to push very hard for them to be able to do it. They need extra intensive services. So they would probably get more of that attention than they would even at a regular school, because we have auditory rehabilitationists, speech language pathologists. We have, and they come in as groups of teachers, listening and spoken language teachers take those students and do groups on specifically speaking and listening. So there's a heavy intensive focus for those students who can benefit from it. And then there's, of course, the students that is just wasting their time.
Would you see ever, follow-up? Yeah, sorry. Would you see ever where you would create a small learning where it would just be the hearing children if necessary for certain things, or would you keep them?
I would see them
very
with the hard of
isolated?
hearing students.
Okay.
With the hard of hearing students, that would make sense. Other than that, we have, even on our campus, which is different than other campuses, we have tables at lunchtime. This is where you sit if you want to speak. And these are the tables you sit at if you just want sign. And we have interpreters in the room who help and facilitate communications for somebody who wants to join one of the other groups and doesn't quite master the other language. And so we have interpreters available. So we hit that really heavily.
Thank you, Member Woods. So I guess we would just support the USDB and creating policy, what that looks like, and then have that brought back to us if that's.
Yeah, I think probably we would maybe request to be on your agenda again after we receive more information, after we gather the feedback from the survey and anything else. The advisory council, we talked about it with them recently, and so they might have more feedback as well at their next meeting. So there's not an emergency to do this right now, but we just thought we'd start the conversation. And if the committee or the board said absolutely not, then we wouldn't waste any more time with it.
I think there was some timing issue in terms of if we wanted to use and Deputy Superintendent Stallings, can you remind me there's a rule in place when they're moving from school to school that we open enrollment timing. And can you help me recall what we were thinking in terms of timing?
Yeah, and I need to pull it up, but the open enrollment statute and rule kind of give windows of openings. It requires certain windows. And Ben, I know you've worked on that rule quite a few times, but I'd have to pull it up. I feel like there's like a February 1 window, and then, there's almost like language in there about, I don't know if it's first come, first serve, but so what I was thinking is we could look at what we do in open enrollment in statute and rule, use that, but then also it's going to be very different because usually when districts are opening for open enrollment, it's because they have spots for like 50 to 100 students, not one. So
Isn't that so for the district to place limitations or parameters on the families, but they don't have to?
Correct. The open enrollment, you don't have to open your school up for open enrollment, period. But if you do, there are some criteria in there that they have to follow so that they're using an orderly system that gives access to, everyone. But yeah, so we can.
And I
we'll
think
look
that
at
will give us some foundations of how to limit, because I think they give some good guidance in how to limit. And with that's the language we're looking for, is how to limit.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Thank you. Had good discussion. Thank you, Joel, Michelle. Appreciate your time. Look forward to hearing from you in the future and later today. Okay, let's move on to our final agenda item, 2.6, meaningful inclusion of students with disabilities. This is it's not a discussion, it's an information. We're talked to today. So, of course, we can ask questions, but Dr. Voorhees is on her way up and she will lead this information item.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. I am excited to report to you today. So in June of 2021, some of you may remember that you made a motion based on a recommendation from the Utah Special Education Advisory Panel that staff, so me, establish micro-credential and training on inclusionary practices for students with disabilities, establish administrator inclusionary practices, training materials, and Utah educational leader competencies, and prepare a board rule provision for committee to review that would require an LEA to include inclusionary practices into the LEA's local policies. So there are 3 parts to that motion. So I wanted to come back and report to you on the accomplishment of that motion and our next steps. So, and just for information for those of you who weren't here, Board Member Lear actually made a separate motion at a separate time that I come back and report on USEEP recommendations. So, no, that's great. I love the opportunity to share, and the Utah Special Education Advisory Panel loves the opportunity to be able to demonstrate that what they recommend actually goes somewhere, that it comes to fruition. Okay, so this particular motion has 3 parts. The first is completely accomplished, which is actually in 3rd place in the motion. But Angie, are you sharing? If you'll go down to the bottom to the 3rd. Let's see where it says bring a board rule provision back. A little bit farther, right there. Nope. Keep going. It's there you go. Okay. So This was the first thing we accomplished in the special education rules. Meaningful inclusion of students with disabilities was defined. So you accepted that definition and made a few tweaks to that definition. The rule passed and has been posted on the website. And in our 277-500, whenever the special education rules are updated, LEAs have to update their policy and procedure manual within 1 year. So all of those policy and procedure manuals were due on Halloween because that was a year after. So all those have all been turned in, we hope. If not, LEAs will be receiving findings of non-compliance. But every LEA in the state should have now updated their policy and procedures to include meaningful inclusion. So then if you go back up to the top, Angie, you can see that there are 4 pages of listing of activities that we have implemented based on the motion and the direction. That includes creating a portrait of meaningful inclusion, students with disabilities, which I have copies for you here today if you would like one. And we took that portrait out to stakeholders. Hundreds of stakeholders have provided us feedback. We turned that feedback into an implementation guide and a self-assessment, which can be used by individuals, like an individual teacher in a classroom, an individual school, or an entire LEA. And we are now receiving feedback on that implementation guide and on that measurement tool. Then we rolled out the portrait, the implementation guide, and the measurement tool across the state. You've heard in several meetings in the last couple of months about the conferences that we provided this across the state. 4 that were focused on educators that were a day and a half, and 5 that were focused on parents that were an evening. We passed out thousands of copies of the Portrait of Meaningful Inclusion, provided lots of professional learning. There were 24 sessions in the educator version and 5 to 7 sessions partnering with the PTA and the Utah Parent Center in the parent versions of the conference. And we were able to have conversations with stakeholders from LEA to community member about improving our system for meaningful inclusion of students with disabilities. The next thing on your in your direction was to create micro-credentials. We have 4 in the works at present, and several more that we're working on the wireframes for. All of the professional learning that we have created to this point is available for asynchronous participation, even if individuals didn't come to the conference. And those micro-credentials will be stackable, and it's really cool because they will be available to educators to be able to take back to their school districts and charter schools for movement on the salary schedule, if that's something that their school districts and charter schools do. But we are also incorporating them into our alternate pathway for licensure for special educators. So our Apple SPED program, which, sidebar, I'm super excited to tell you, as of last week, we had 291 people with professional learning plans in our Apple program, and we've had 6 graduates. So all of this work will just feed into that Apple SPED program. So we have presented on this work now across the nation. And last week, Kim Frado and I presented at the National Association of State Directors of Special Education. The director of the Office of Special Education Programs, Valerie Williams, was in our session, and she did her keynote speech the day after our session and said 3 times that this work was so good and that everyone across the nation should talk to us about this work. So we're very grateful for the support. The Special Education Advisory Panel, you got their letter last month about their gratitude. We're so grateful for the ESSER money that we used for the conferences, because federal money cannot be used to buy food. It cannot be used to buy pens that we gave out and the little backpacks that we gave out for people to put their materials in. We can't use federal dollars for that. So the $200,000 that you gave us was used for the treats and for the swag, like a little backpack, even a plastic backpack. But thank you, Board Member Wood, and the little pens that we had made. So, and for other conference fees. So we just wanted you to know, the Special Education Advisory Panel wanted you to know that we, as the staff, took that motion very seriously, and in partnership with the PTA, with the Parent Center, with the Special Education Advisory Panel, with other stakeholders, a lot has happened, and we're excited about the next steps. So I'm happy to answer questions about that. In your backup, I also provided a document that has feedback that we put the feedback from the rollout of the Portrait of Meaningful Inclusion, which we lovingly call the POMI. We put that into themes, into 3 major themes, and I provided that for you for information's sake.
Member Wood?
Well, I just wanted to thank you. I had the opportunity to attend the Layton evening for parents, and sitting in some of those sessions and just hearing parents really get into the weeds of how to do IEPs and what questions to ask. And I just felt like it was really informative, and you got to the end of the row. Too often I feel like the things we do stay up here, and parents don't know how much we're trying to do good things for kids. So thank you for the work and for your staff.
Yeah, thank you. I echo that as well. We appreciate not only the work that you've done, but I can't remember what I did a year ago, and you guys are on top of it. You're doing everything that we've asked and more. Calling out Member Lear for making you come back here. I mean, it's all wonderful. It's all wonderful. So I truly appreciate what you and your organization is doing. Thank you. Member Hart.
Have you compiled, I'm just wondering, have you compiled any information like sheets that we could share with our legislative partners who were concerned about inclusion practices, that we may be able to follow up on their concerns?
So the actual portrait of meaningful inclusion is a 1-pager. So we definitely share the IEP reflective framework. We do have a 1-pager on that is attached, but we could certainly create an infographic that you could use.
I would love staff to create an infographic to share, in particular with the Administrative Rules Committee. Yeah, I think that would be very
on it.
Member Lear,
Don't
please.
want to belabor this at all. I just so appreciate your work, Leah. You've been a really good example, I think, to all of us as a director, and I don't want to embarrass you or anything, but you've just, it's been really delightful. And I especially appreciate, I've was in this office in years when USEAM was not particularly cooperative, and vice versa. It wasn't, there just wasn't a really good relation. And it's so great to see an advisory committee that does exactly what we hope, and is so involved and is so helpful to your work. So thanks for making that work also. I think it's just a really good example to all of us of how well sections can work with their personnel and their advisors. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Voorhees. Yes, please. We are close.
This is kind of a point of personal privilege, but something I just had to share, given our last two agenda items, that in the last 2 weeks, my daughter told me that she wants to be a teacher who works with students on the spectrum, a special education teacher. But she also told me she wants to take ASL. So because she says, I feel like if I learn ASL, I can help more students as an educator. And she's 11. And my heart was like, ooh, just grew 3 sizes because I was so proud of her. So there you go. Future recruitment it's a couple years out, but we're getting there.
I have always been interested in a dual immersion sign language class and adding sign language to one of our schools in our dual immersion program.
Well, I was looking up this program. There's a program in Southern California called Tripod, and it was actually designed by a family that had deaf and hearing twins. And the mom, by about 6 to 9 months, recognized that there was a very distinct difference between the two. The pediatricians were like, oh yeah, we have parents coming in all the time. Just wait, they'll be fine. But I was reading kind of the history of this model, and it was a K through 12, deaf and hearing, went along, leadership. But one of the requirements was this adult, family ASL classes, where that was the most important element of it, is that it was a family affair. And my classes were I was 3, and they were at a college classroom, because we went to our local college. So I think preschool would have been way more fun than where I learned sign language.
Thank you, Member Wood. Thank you, Dr. Voorhees. And that concludes our final agenda item. And I think we move to adjourn. One. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Great.
And I
meeting
have
adjourned.
a picture of the cute backpacks from if you need to see the fun swag, I have a picture.
Thank you, committee.